What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was treated like trash but forged the ultimate chakra blade? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. It was the day of reckoning. He was home. It's been almost 2.5 years, hasn't it? It wasn't really a question. Yeah, it has. The teen stopped in the middle of the street and took a deep breath. The grin that spread across his face was contagious, and with barely contained joy, the blonde nearly flew up the side of a nearby building. His black shoes were almost silent as they touched the top of the water tower, but he didn't stay that way long, because after another deep breath he shouted to the world with arms wide to embrace it, "I missed this place." A small chuckle escaped the blonde as he stuffed his hands into his pockets, a serene smile settling across his face. I really did miss this place. His blue eyes swept across the village, his village. His home, was that? Hey, looks like they finally got around to carving Oba-chan's face on the mountain, the teen blinked. You've grown a lot, haven't you, Naruto? He turned towards the voice with a smile, even as the speaker raised a hand in greeting. Yo. Kakashi-sensei. Ha, you haven't changed a bit. The blonde hopped down from his perch, landing lightly beside his old teacher even as his face lit up. Oh yeah. Got something for you. Naruto rummaged in the pack slung over his shoulder till he found the item he was looking for, presenting it to his former sensei. The masked Junin's eye widened. Why you? How? But this is. Naruto placed the book in his sensei's hands, grinning unabashedly at the man. Yep. Icha Tactics, latest in the series. The grin became devious, and it's a rare, signed, uncut version too. When the older man let out a strangled sound of happiness, Naruto knew his job here was done. Right, Naruto checked off the first box on his things to do upon return to Konoha list of the day. Next stop, Ichiraku Ramen. It wasn't that Naruto didn't like the minions' cooking, it was actually quite delicious and probably a lot better for him. But come on, it was old man Tuchi's ramen and Naruto hadn't had it in years, literally. The teenager took off down the street at a relatively slow pace, little more than a civilian jog. Not too far behind him, Jiraiya spoke with Kakashi. As promised, I'll leave him to your care. The older man hesitated as they walked behind Naruto at a more sedate pace. You don't seem like the type to start him wearing armor, or using a sword. The Sannin frowned. I didn't. Tomorrow, I'm going to give a full report to Tsunade at 8. You need to be there. Jiraiya didn't take his eyes off their student. I'm going to be off gathering information by the end of this week at the latest. I'm afraid the Akatsuki are getting impatient. They might make their move soon. Gah. The two older men's attention refocused on their blonde student a ways ahead of them, who'd just run into a certain pink-haired Kunoichi. Sakura-chan, Naruto? Two Sannin, two apprentices, and one particularly lazy Junin huddled together. Arguably the 5 strongest ninja currently in the village, all in one spot. Sakura did her best, cute, impression, giving her old teammate a shy smile. How'd I look? Do I look more like a woman now? Warning bells went off in Naruto's head. Danger, danger. Tact required. Don't say something stupid. Neutral answer. Complimentary but true. Complimentary but true. He gave his friend his smile, a real one, and said with conviction, you look like a true Kunoichi. Her jaw dropped slightly before immediately closing. The young woman huffed and looked away, fighting to keep the scowl on her face even as a light shade of pink tinted her cheeks. You still don't get women, do you? Naruto chuckled embarrassedly as he scratched the back of his neck, accidentally drawing attention to something Sakura hadn't noticed before. Hey, you've gotten taller than me? Naruto blinked, doing a double take of his own before grinning wildly. Yeah, looks like it. While the blonde amused himself by trying to count the number of centimeters he had on her, Sakura couldn't help but smile affectionately at him. Naruto, you've gotten a lot stronger since the last time I saw you. The girl didn't have to be a chakra sensor to feel the warmth of Naruto's chakra at this distance. Tsunade and her had bumped into him entirely on accident, and it was only within a couple feet of him that his surging field of chakra was readily obvious. A loud bang stopped any further conversation before it could start. Naruto ni-chan. Once the speaker was certain all attention was focused on him, he became a shi no jutsu. Jiraiya ogled, Sakura recoiled, Kakashi didn't care. Tsunade gave the boy-turned-girl a blank stare, and Naruto smirked. As the nude girl became a clothed boy once again with another loud bang, Naruto almost chuckled, barely restraining himself as Konohamaru spoke. Well, how was that jutsu? Had some real oomph to it, didn't it? Now he let himself chuckle softly and shake his head just a bit before giving the boy a serious look. Konohamaru, I'm sorry, but I'm not a kid anymore. From now on, you shouldn't use that jutsu either. As Naruto stepped closer to the now admonished boy, Sakura felt a peculiar warmth spreading through her chest. Naruto, you haven't just gotten older, you're more mature now too, aren't you? It makes me feel a little sad. You've really become amazing in your time away, haven't you? Konohamaru, Naruto ruffled the boy's hair with a hand. That kind of jutsu has its place, mostly as a joke. But a mischievous grin spread across his formerly serious face. It would be pretty useful against someone like Ero Sennin. So don't go forgetting it, kay? While Konohamaru smiled, Sakura scowled at Naruto without really meaning it. Naruto, don't encourage perverted jutsu like that. The pink-haired Kunoichi playfully smacked him in the back of the head. Idiot. The teen grinned, rubbing the not slightly sore spot on the back of his head. Hey. I actually used that jutsu to take down a Hokage. It has its uses. Ibeo. Sakura went to primary anti-pervert response. Stage 1, Chamber the Strike. Stage 2, Sakuwa Puinch. Idiot. Naruto's face met the dirt at a sizable fraction of the speed of sound. Thankfully, Naruto's face won this particular confrontation. Even as Konohamaru, quite intelligently, made a tactical retreat to a, questionably, safer position behind Kakashi, Sakura wasn't done. The young woman dragged Naruto out of the ground by his new black scarf so she could berate him for his foolishness properly. You are such an idiot. Only an imbecile like you would try to use that on a cage. She began to shake the boy quite violently. You just had to go and destroy that wonderful feeling of respect I had for you just now, didn't you? Gah. Kakashi held his hands up placatingly at his former student. Hey, Sakura, calm down. As if on cue, the boy hiding behind him peeked around him. You've got Konohamaru here terrified. Sakura huffed indignantly and let go of the blonde ninja, momentarily surprised when, instead of falling on his ass, he just straightened his legs. She barely had time to properly process the fact that not only was Naruto a half-head taller than she was, but that he'd recovered from her punch quickly enough to get his feet beneath him. The reason she had so little time to process this was simple. The Hokage was speaking. Right, the nostalgia ends now. Kakashi, said Junin's book closed with a snap. It really has been a while, hasn't it? His students looked at him curiously even as he gave them a reasonably serious look. From now on, the two of you will come with me on team-related missions. It's different from before, it's no longer teacher and pupils. Starting today, we're equal Konoha shinobis. But, well, the masked man lifted a hand. A pair of very familiar bells dangling from it. First, I'm a bit curious as to how you've developed. The rules are the same as when we first met. Their smiles were tempered by, what? Seriousness? Dedication? Kakashi couldn't put a name to it. But he liked that look. If you don't come at me with the intent to kill, you will never succeed in getting these bells. Training Area 3. It really brought back memories. The rules are the same as before. It doesn't matter how, but you must get these bells away from me. He let said bells jingle to accentuate the remark. You have till sunrise tomorrow. Man, I really missed this place. Naruto couldn't help but smile at the 3 training logs not far behind Kakashi. Yeah, me too. There was a bit of wistfulness in Sakura's tone as well, the girl's eyes slowly sweeping over the forest beyond the logs. Ah, that's right. Kakashi picked up on the reason for their nostalgia even as he tore his eye away from the brand new book in his hand. This is where you first trained, isn't it? Team 7, the 3-man team. Naruto scowled. That time, for a moment, Kakashi was just as caught up in the past as his students. Sasuke was around too, wasn't he? A melancholy silence settled over the team. Kakashi breaking out of the mood first to find Sakura curled up into a ball and sniffling while Naruto gripped his elbows so tightly that his fingers went white, scowling off into the distance. Sasuke's name is a taboo word for these two, huh? The Junin shut his book with a snap, breaking the spell over the two teens. Well then, shall we begin? Naruto grinned, his right hand going to grasp the hilt of Maelstrom where it rested over his left shoulder. Hey, you're not going to try reading your book this time. Kakashi-sensei. The blonde's other hand came up into half of a ram seal. There was the sound of leather flexing as Sakura tugged on the gloves meant to protect her hands from her own ridiculous strength. You've already finished it? No, I think I'll save it for later. Besides, for some reason, the book went back into his pouch. I'm getting the feeling that I should take this a bit seriously too. The Hite 8 went up and out came the source of nightmares for many ninja. The Sharingan Eye, wielded by copycat Kakashi. For a long moment, one generation tried to stare the other down. Then Kakashi deliberately let the bells make the slightest noise. Naruto swung Maelstrom horizontally. A blade of compressed fire flying from the large sword and hurtling straight at Kakashi with a whisper of crescent flame. The older nin went low to the ground, dropping beneath the fire and loosing a trio of shuriken in the blonde's direction. Naruto hadn't been standing still. He deflected the shuriken towards Kakashi with a spin of his sword even as he rushed behind his own flaming projectile. Naruto continued with his swing and spun on the ball of his foot, turning around fully just feet from Kakashi and thrusting Maelstrom at him in a single move, putting the full force of his spin behind the tip of his blade. Kakashi blurred, his hand grabbing Naruto's blade hand and deflecting the sword into the dirt even as his other brought a kunai to the blonde's neck. Only to find another blade at his own. He created a clone in his own shadow, which then replaced itself with the shuriken that came closest to me after he deflected them. Clever. I might have missed it if I didn't have the Sharingan. Well, the lazy copy nin drawled, his voice not showing a hint of the pride he felt in his student. It seems your haste hasn't changed. They paused, both remembering the first time they'd had this test, with very similar results. Then, Kakashi smiled. All right, start. And he was gone in a poof of smoke. Sakura immediately went on the offensive, behind, left, right, above, no? Then it has to be. The kunoichi raised her fist high above her head, below. Boom. Naruto leapt away from the still-forming crater at his friend's feet, an eyebrow twitching in disbelief, his thoughts unknowingly mirroring those of his suddenly exposed senseis. Wow, what insane strength. Oba-chan, you taught her more than medical jutsu, didn't you? Ibeo? Found you. Naruto briefly wondered if it was wrong to be turned on by that a woman that could probably kill him. The Junin leapt out of the crater, the bells jingling slightly as he did. Right. Guess I should do something on my end this time. But that could wait. OHSHIT. Naruto hunkered beside a sitting Sakura, his slow and controlled breathing a counterpoint to the girl's panting. I already knew the Sharingan was amazing, but it sucks being reminded of it? Naruto supplied helpfully. Yeah, and his speed at hand seals. It's too fast for me to follow. The girl glanced at the blonde beside her. He'd surprised her at almost every turn in the fight, showing greater depths of knowledge than she could have guessed. He'd apparently been working on the basics a lot during the past 2 years. Naruto had been serious, insightful, and able to include her in his plans on the fly. Sakura honestly wouldn't have been too surprised if he could follow Kakashi-sensei's seals. Sadly though, same here, I'm just picking out some key ones, like tiger or snake. While Sakura nodded to acknowledge the blonde's statement, she scowled. If we could somehow stop him from using both hands, we'd be able to get our hands on those bells, if being the key word. Kakashi-sensei is almost as much a monster as Ero Sennin or Obaa-chan. Naruto huffed even as he rested a hand against Maelstrom's matte black blade while keeping an eye and ear out for their opponent. But neither of them were anywhere near giving up, but even Kakashi-sensei has to have a weak point. If we think it over, the kunoichi looked over at her partner, whose eyes narrowed in thought. Sakura caught the slight shift in his body. The blonde wanted to assume an exaggerated thinking pose, but restrained himself because of the seriousness of the situation. You really have grown, nay Naruto? They were silent for a long moment before Naruto spoke up softly. Nay, Sakura-chan. You've got better memory than me. Remember the first fight between Kakashi-sensei and Zabuza of the Mist? Sakura's face briefly scrunched up in thought before she replied, yeah, the one where we were all together and Kakashi-sensei got caught in a water prison, right? Yeah, that one. Tell me, when sensei had Zabuza beat, was Zabuza heavily injured? Another brief scowl. Yeah, he'd just been hit with a grand vortex, right? Well, did he seem particularly tired as well? Her large forehead furrowed in thought. Zabuza hadn't been breathing hard or anything as he lay against that tree. Just beat up badly, but… Not really, but what does that have to do with anything? Sakura knew Naruto was going somewhere with this, and she knew she should see it, damn it, but she couldn't figure it out. What did Sensei do right after Haku? He noted her confusion. The fake hunter Nin left. He collapsed from X house, Tion. Sakura's eyes went wide. Naruto turned and grinned at her, sending pleasant little shivers up her spine. Exactly. Those kids, they've certainly gotten better. I haven't gotten a single chance to read my new book even. The Junin sighed. I've got to be careful though, if I overuse the Sharingan, I'll run out of stamina. That's my weakness, though. I'm surprised. His Sharingan eye narrowed. Naruto isn't using his clones much, the most I've seen so far is 5. Why? While Sakura's power is immense, her speed is only mediocre. It's been reasonably easy to dodge her attacks so far. No, the problem is Naruto. Instead of spamming Cage Bunshin like I know he can, he's limited himself to support. Why? The Junin actually scowled at that, a small frown appearing beneath his mask. Whenever I go for Sakura, a clone switches out with her and there's suddenly a sword in my face. He's considerably faster than before, and his fighting style is far more refined, but he never showed any inclination towards Kenjutsu beforehand. That, and he's been leading the attacks, falling into a 1, 2, 3 oh my god that Sakura's fist pattern. It's actually been pretty effective. I've been hard-pressed to dodge it every time so far. If they just kept that up, I'd be in trouble. Kakashi's frown became a small smile, but that's predictable, and Naruto's never predictable. A pair of familiar smells hit the Junin's nose. They're here. 2 Narutos burst from the trees not too far in front of Kakashi, Sakura close behind them. But Kakashi saw the clone coming at him from his 730. The heat of the crescent flame the Naruto behind him had fired was stopped cold when a wall of dirt shot up behind the Junin. There was barely a pause between the end of one jutsu and the start of another. His hands flew through the seals, and before Sakura and the pair of Narutos were halfway to him, a massive ball of flames was hurtling their way. The Narutos dropped to a knee, pulling Sakura down between them and presenting the armored plates of their shoulders onto the oncoming fireball. Chakra surging out of the flat steel to form a pane of surging chakra to meet the fire. It was actually quite interesting to see the chakra-fueled flames of his jutsu be repelled by raw chakra and some minor shape manipulation. It looked especially interesting with the Sharingan. Wait, didn't a clone of Naruto always switch out with Sakura when he put her in Dang? Kakashi moved. Sakura's fist went through the wall of earth behind Kakashi as if it never existed and continued on through where the Junin's chest had been only fractions of a second before. Kakashi somersaulted away from the pink-haired powerhouse, catching sight of 3 Narutos plowing right through his fireball towards his back, their flaming black swords held in front of them. The kunoichi kept on coming before the debris of his earthen defense even settled back to the ground, and Kakashi had to leap to the right to avoid the vicious punch from his former student. One of the Naruto clones used the kunoichi's back as a springboard to launch himself into the air. The blonde then began to launch crescent flame after crescent flame at the Junin, forcing Kakashi to dodge even further back to avoid the blades of fire. His hands began to go through another set of seals when the other 2 Narutos somehow slipped through the rain of fire. In that split second, Kakashi realized that Naruto had been planning to interrupt his hand seals with something like this the whole time. It would have worked if Kakashi hadn't begun a backflip at the last possible second, his feet passing through the space the clones' heads would have been had they not pulled up short. He'd landed several feet back and finished his seals, Sweden, Tepudama. The airborne Naruto managed to land after the sizable bullet of water had destroyed its companions. All in all, it was a maneuver that wouldn't have worked if he hadn't still had reach on the boy. Wait, why was Naruto's scent so strong? Kakashi launched himself forward, dodging around Naruto's odachi to land a solid punch to the blonde's face. Kakashi wasn't surprised when the boy disappeared in smoke, nor was he particularly surprised when what he assumed to be the real Naruto finished pulling himself out of the ground where Kakashi had been only a second before. Naruto, this boy, was he really making it up as he went? Or was he planning it all out? They both seemed equally unlikely. Wait, the blonde was grinning wildly at him. Shit? Kakashi glanced behind him, worried that Sakura might have taken his distraction as a chance to get closer, but while the girl was approaching him, it was at a sedate pace and she was still a ways off. The Junin's eyes snapped back to Naruto. In the half-second his eyes had been off the blonde. The boy had stuck his odachi onto his back once again. Both ninja tensed, but neither made a move for several very long seconds. Then Naruto slowly took his hand from the hilt of his sword, starting to bring them in front of his chest. Nay. Kakashi-sensei? Yes, Naruto? You're in the center of a pretty big clearing, huh? The blonde's hands began to settle into a familiar cross seal. Kakashi did not give the boy the chance, because he understood exactly what the blonde was implying by that statement. Shuriken flew through the air at the teen and Naruto had to leap high into the air to avoid them. Another set almost immediately followed the first, aimed right at the airborne blonde. What the boy did made Kakashi's eyebrows go up. The boy created a clone in midair, and had the clone pull him out of the way. Inventive use of shadow clones, but it's not enough. The original grabbed the clone, turning in the air even as it turned into a massive shuriken. But the moment his feet touched dirt, Kakashi's foot touched his face, hard. Only for the blonde to explode into smoke. It had been a clone all along? Shit. The masked Junin flipped and twisted in the air, pulling out a pair of kunai before he landed after his kick, facing the pink-haired kunoichi across from him. His fears were confirmed when the pinkette gave him a foxy grin, bringing her hands up into a familiar cross seal. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. For a moment, Kakashi felt as if the world had suddenly gotten blurry. He comforted himself that he wasn't going blind, it was just the absurd number of Sakura lookalikes that were phasing into existence all around him. Damn, I'd be willing to bet the real Sakura is in there somewhere as well. The masked man tilted his head to the side and drawled out, "Oh. I was wondering when this would come out. I was saving it for when I had the space Kakashi-sensei." The first Sakura drew out the syllables of the Junin's name teasingly, waggling a finger at him. 100 Mies is all well and good, but there's no use if they get in each other's way, nay? A quick scan of the crowd confirmed it. The kunoichi lookalikes were all reasonably spaced apart. That meant Naruto had intentionally created them in this pattern. It seems chakra control wasn't his worst point anymore. 100 times nothing is still nothing, Naruto. Several of the pinkettes blinked before that foxy grin settled on every face in the crowd. I know that, sensei, but shadow clones don't multiply me, they divide. And you can't exactly divide by 0 now, can you? Kakashi paused to think about that. I guess not. The sides of his eyes crinkled as he smiled into the crowd. That must mean you're more than nothing then, huh, Naruto? The momentary surprise that rippled through the crowd of Sakuras was not wasted. Kakashi flew through them like a reaper through wheat, his kunais hitting shoulders and knees. Searching for a girl that didn't pop when cut. Kakashi had taken out nearly 30 of the 200-odd clones before they reacted, but react they did. Apparently Naruto hadn't just been working on his kenjutsu. The white-haired man dipped and dodged and moved through the swarm, but it was suddenly a lot harder to hit them than before. Every time the Junin tried to get out of the clearing, get himself some space and limit the number of clones that could swarm him, several clones would burst at him in a coordinated strike and force him to dodge back into the clearing. Their speed was good, and while Naruto wasn't the powerhouse that Sakura was, Kakashi wasn't about to let himself get hit. One time a clone had him cornered against a tree, and while the Junin had done a flip over the oncoming punch, he'd gotten a good look at what it did to the poor tree. The blonde-turned Sakura had torn off bark, splintered a portion of the trunk, and made a number of cracks appear in the wood. With a single punch. No, Naruto wasn't on the same level as Tsunade or Sakura, but he was a powerhouse. This is taking too long, was the Junin's thought as he ducked underneath a synchronized pair of punches and stabbed his attackers in the thighs, making them pop. Naruto is out there somewhere making more clones every time I destroy some, and I'm getting tired. He's forced me into his kind of fight, a test of stamina. Steel glinted in Kakashi's eyes. Well, we're not ones to play by the rules, Obito? The Junin launched himself high into the air, rotating to face the ground as his hands flying through the seals. Kaden. Gukakyu no Jutsu. He pinched his fingers in front of his lips and blew. The clearing became hell on earth. Kakashi let the flames trickle off as he reached the apex of his jump. It looked like he'd gotten most of the clones, the only survivors being the ones that had ducked behind trees at the edge of the clearing. His feeling of satisfaction was cut off by 2 whispered words. "Hey, Kakashi-sensei." His Sharingan widened and he twisted around in the air. There, behind him, was Sakura. The real Sakura. How'd he know? Well, the fact that the girl had just ripped a tree out of the ground and was about to use it like a club was a bit of a clue. The tree came down fast. Kakashi didn't even get a chance to substitute out before getting caught in the limbs. Thankfully, he was able to substitute out with a pre-prepared log before he hit the dirt. Hitting the ground at that speed with a tree on top of you would not have been fun. Unfortunately, the log he replaced himself with was at the edges of his range, and the moment the Junin's feet touched dirt, he staggered. He immediately caught himself and straightened, but it had happened. "Hey, I've been using a lot of chakra-intensive jutsu, haven't I?" His gloved hand came up and tugged his hite-aid back down over his eye. "I'll have to be careful and pace myself, they're starting to wear me down." His nose twitched and his visible eye widened. "They've found me already?" Kakashi turned towards the smell to find a fully armored blonde thundering towards him, in absolute silence. Even he felt a little intimidated by that, but it didn't stop him from bringing his arms up in a basic defensive stance. 10 feet away from him, Naruto launched himself into the air, hurtling like a missile towards Kakashi. I can handle." One blonde turned into 40 mid-air. Oshi. The Junin's reflexes kicked in, Naruto's were smacked out of the sky like flies. But there were a lot of them, damn it. One hit him hard, knocking the wind out of him, immediately followed by another, then a third and fourth. Within seconds the masked Junin was on the dirt, covered in Naruto's. A blonde for every limb, 3 for his torso, and another covering his head. Well, okay, that could have been worse. All I've got to do is make a snarky comment and switch out with one of the wait. Naruto's chest isn't that soft. Oshi the switched with Saku. The copy nin didn't get to finish his thought before a medical jutsu knocked him out. Sakura couldn't help but smile warmly at her teammate. They'd passed Kakashi-sensei's test fair and square this time. Together. And if she was honest with herself, it had mostly been due to Naruto. Even if it didn't look like it right now, the blonde had been the one to take point in every skirmish with Sensei, leading the fight, making the plans, setting up the openings. Sakura had been surprised, pleasantly so, at the seriousness which he'd taken the test. During one of their impromptu planning sessions, Naruto had given her his assessment of their sensei. Better at taijutsu than Fuzzy Brows, nearly as good a planner as Shikamaru, better sense of smell than Kiba. Fastest ninjutsu I've ever seen, and that damn Sharingan to top it all off. Hey, Kakashi-sensei's a beast alright. Well, Naruto? Sakura couldn't help but smile wider as she watched her friend. If Kakashi-sensei's a beast, you're a monster. The only member of the old Rookie 9 that beats you in taijutsu is Lee. You're almost as fast as he is with his weights on, and you match him in brute strength. You haven't shown a lot of techniques, but the ones you know, you really know. And your kenjutsu is better than some of the Anbu I know. She made a quick check of the prone form of Kakashi beside her to make sure he was recovering properly before returning to her musing. Your own tracking abilities are nothing to scoff at, your sense of hearing, sight, and smell are better than a normal human's. Your clones are so tough that you have to really hit them to make them dispel, and your stamina is as crazy as ever. Hey, you might not plan out every step like Shikamaru, but your overall plans are good and still leave leeway for your trademark unpredictability. The blonde's plans had gone something like this. Okay, let's push him into the clearing so I can spam Cage Bunshin for a bit and tire him out. You'll come at him from the front with a pair of clones while I send another clone at him from behind. The flanking clone's gonna attack him with fire. Kakashi-sensei'll probably block it with a quick water or earth wall before throwing a really big attack jutsu at the assault team. When he does, the clones'll grab you and drop to the dirt and protect you. I want you to use that as a cover to switch out with the flanking clone and attack Sensei from behind. Now, I don't expect you to hit him, but try to force him towards the clearing. Sakura had of course asked, and after that? He grinned at her, sending a pleasant tingle up her spine. Well, we'll figure that out when we get there. When she'd stopped to think about it, Sakura had almost been scared. Scared that the boy she'd known, hyperactive, naive, eager to please, and a bit of a knucklehead, no longer existed. That the guy who'd asked her out every day, usually several times, for so long, had been completely replaced by this serious young man. Then he'd taken a bell of Kakashi's belt and started doing this little dance that made her laugh. He was still doing it actually. It was still the Naruto she knew, just grown up. A small, affectionate sigh escaped her before she could stifle it, an embarrassed blush spreading across her face as she checked to make sure Naruto hadn't noticed. Thankfully, he hadn't. Gah, now I'm mooning over Naruto of all people. Sakura berated herself as she forced herself to check over Kakashi once again, making sure the older man hadn't been unduly hurt by a suddenly induced change in his brainwaves. Inner Sakura had to add her to Ryo, even though his butt looks real nice in those pants, and that chest plate. Talk about a chest plate. You can't get much more form-fitting than that. The mental figure started to drool unabashedly. Sakura's eyebrow twitched in irritation at the stray thought, so, it's Naruto, he's still a bit of a blockhead and a pervert. A quick glance confirmed that the object of her thoughts was still doing his victory dance, and had been for the past 30 minutes, not to mention he's doing the stupidest dance. A dance that does such wonderfully yummy things to his hips. And talk about stamina. Roar. Bet he could go on and on all nig. The voice in her head was promptly silenced with the mental equivalent of a roundhouse kick. Nay, Sakura-chan. Any idea when Kakashi-sensei's going to wake up? I wanna rub this in his mask a bit before the warm fuzzies go away tt Ibeo. Sakura's eyebrow began twitching again as she growled, Naruto. What? The blonde squatted down on the other side of Kakashi and gave her a grin. You know you want to do it too. She huffed when he waggled his eyebrows at her suggestively. No I don't Naru. Yes you do. Same Naruto all right. Sakura shook her fist at the blonde and drew out every syllable of his name with as much warning as she could muster, Naruto. Then Naruto's expression changed a bit. He became a bit more serious instead of teasing, leaning in a bit closer, his blue eyes boring into her own as he whispered, Sakura-chan, it's not right to deny your feelings like that. Not really acting on them is okay, but don't deny they exist. The kunoichi stopped in place, her fist still hanging in the air as she said his name again, unable to identify the emotion that she put into it, Naruto. For a moment, she just stared at the serious and yet slightly smiling boy, no, young man, that was across from her. In that instant, she could truly see him as the Hokage. Then he gave her one of his sillier grins and the spell was broken. All those repressed urges can't be good for you. You might just, explode from frustration or something tt Ibeo. Gah, Naruto. Sakura smacked the chuckling blonde upside the head pretty hard, but they both could read the subtext. I missed you Sakura, I missed you too, Naruto? Naruto sat quietly beside the prone form of his sensei, content with the world as it was. He'd beaten his sensei in a fair fight, no tricks, no gimmicks, no Kyuubi, no minions. Just him and Sakura-chan. It was an amazing feeling. He'd been tempted to try and perform the 1,000 years of death on his old sensei, but he wanted to show that he could be serious today. Besides, Naruto knew he'd get another chance. Either that or make one. Naruto grinned at the thought. At least until another voice broke into his thoughts, literally, sire? Yeah Narl, what is it? Naruto wasn't angry per se, just unhappy to have his pleasant musings interrupted. Well, I'm curious as to why you did not summon the minions to aid you. Naruto schooled his external expression to keep from worrying Sakura, but he let his irritation shine through his thoughts to Narl. I've told you this before Narl. I will not use the power of the Kyuubi on allies. It's far too likely that I'll get too into the fight and actually hurt them. Having to order people around had gradually changed Naruto more than almost anything else. The only thing that beat that was Narl's insistence that the boy think before he acted. Naruto had never been able to interact with people on a regular basis. In Konoha, he'd been socially isolated to the point that he was actually in the process of developing mental problems, and traveling with Jiraiya. He'd oftentimes left a place before having to really feel the consequences of his actions. And he'd never had the slightest experience with commanding others. The minions might have been slavishly loyal, slightly sadistic, and dumber than a sack of particularly dull hammers. But they had personalities and minds of their own. It took a stern hand to rule them, and that stern hand extended to Narl as well. It might have been amusing to see his minions run around with pumpkins for hats, but people tended to have issues when they ran around with a gutted lamb as a helmet. So, firm hand. I don't understand, sire. How does not using the Nine Tails power relate to not summoning your minions? Naruto frowned momentarily before he caught himself. He thought Gnarl was smarter than that. Gnarl, I won't use the Kyuubi's power because it's too dangerous, and minions have very little self-control. If I empowered them enough to be a threat to Kakashi-sensei, they do their best to kill him, and I'm not willing to take that risk just to speed up a fight. Besides, the corner of the blonde's mouth twitched upwards just a hint. It's good training to push myself every once in a while. Naruto paused in his thoughts for a moment before adding, and I'd rather you didn't contact me again during these first few days. I just want to enjoy meeting my friends again and savor being home for a while, no overlording and stuff till then, K? Ah, I understand, sire. The tone to the minion master's words said he did, but he didn't like it. Well, that wouldn't do. Ah yes, Gnarl? There was a pause on the other end. Yes, sire. If you ever suggest that I use lethal force against allies again, I will lock you inside Mortis Pool for a month. Fair warning and all that Ttebao. Sure thing, sire. I'll endeavor to keep that in mind. The mental connection was cut abruptly, making the corners of Naruto's mouth twitch again. There wasn't much that scared minions. They actually revered minions that had died in creative ways in the name of their overlord. But they wanted to die in service of their overlord, or not at all. No minion has ever died of old age. Gnarl himself has actually lost track of the years, so most minions died either working on their lord's projects, like redesigning the netherworld, or in battle. But to have their soul forced into the pool of the dead without dying for their overlord? That absolutely terrified them, more so than the Kyuubi terrified Konoha. It might take entire villages worth of life force to bring the ancient minion master back from the pool after he'd been shoved in there. But Naruto would, and had done it before to make his point. Naruto would not tolerate the minions' sadistic tendencies where allies were involved. But enough of these darker thoughts. Naruto wasn't Sasuke or anything Ttebao. So, what was it that had made him so content before that conversation again? Ah, beating the snot out of sensei, hee, good times, good times. Gnarl was happy that Naruto's darker side was truly starting to show. He really was. He'd encouraged and developed it in the boy himself. But that didn't mean the boy couldn't scare him sometimes. The ancient minion gulped to himself as he shuffled down the stairs that ran along the outside of the spire. He would not willingly let himself go back to that pool like that ever again. He shook himself once to get rid of the heebie-jeebies he'd gotten remembering that place. Now, there was no way he was going to just let his overlord go unsupervised, threat or no. He just wouldn't contact the boy. The threat ran through his mind again and Gnarl shivered. He seriously hoped those beetles would keep his mind off that. Kakashi was awake. He didn't twitch, he didn't move, he didn't do much of anything other than wake up. Then he remembered he wasn't on a mission and it had just been his own students that knocked him out. His students were on either side of him, probably kneeling. While they were quiet, there wasn't any tension in the air. They'd probably taken him aside after they'd knocked him out, talked a bit, then settled down to wait for him to get up. Taking into account Naruto's new level of maturity, that could have taken anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. Hey, Kakashi-sensei? Yes, Naruto? Kakashi could feel the grin directed at him. Just making sure you were awake. The Junin sighed. Well, there goes my nap. You two have really become strong, huh? I'm surprised you were actually able to get the bells. PFT. Of course, Kakashi-sensei. Naruto grinned at the Junin in the growing light of the morning. You didn't think we spent the past couple years slacking off, did ya? I wouldn't be surprised if we'd even surpassed you, Ttebao. Naruto. Sakura admonishingly smacked the boy's armored shoulder. Though there was a small smile on her face. Don't be conceited. Kakashi chuckled, smiling at his charges and shaking his head a bit. But anyway, I'm still young. He did not hear that disbelieving snort from Naruto. He didn't, and I've recently developed a brilliant new jutsu. The Junin was cut off by a particularly eloquent grumble from Naruto's stomach. Ah, I almost forgot. I've barely done anything on my list. The blonde boy grabbed the sides of his head. Crap. I haven't even gone to Ichiraku Ramen, or home, but I haven't gone to Old Man Tucci's place yet. Damn, Sakura actually considered that a moment. Yeah, I'm a bit hungry myself from the exercise yesterday. Kakashi couldn't help the sigh that escaped him. Back then, they'd react to every little thing. They were cute back then. Naruto snickered and whispered conspiratorially to Sakura, right. It'll be Kakashi-sensei's treat. The girl couldn't help but grin devilishly, alright sensei. However, the masked man had different ideas. Sorry, I have to create and submit a list of formations of the new teams, so it's goodbye for now, Yane. And then he was gone. Ah, bastard ran away. Naruto huffed, crossing his arms over his chest. He honestly should have seen that coming when he'd volunteered the man to pay. Lazy bastard was pretty good at running away. Sakura hemped, saying something like that. He's just trying to read that book more, probably. Something dawned on Naruto. Hey, well, since it's just us, you still want to go? The girl shrugged, sure. Naruto beamed at her, then it's a dat. You're paying. He blinked before shrugging himself, sure, it'll be nice to catch up with things Ibeo. The teen pulled his frog wallet out of his pocket, checking to be sure he still had enough on him. It was about then when Sakura recognized a pair of faces in the crowd and called out excitedly, Shikamaru. Tamari-san. Hey, who do you think this is? The pinkette gestured at the taller boy beside her. It took a moment for Shikamaru to put a name to the face on top of the body of a samurai, but once he did a smile spread across his face, hey. If it isn't Naruto. Naruto barked out a short laugh, ha. Shikamaru, I missed you man. As the two pairs of shinobi approached one another, the blondes glanced at each other. Temari's analytical mind performed an automatic threat assessment. Approximately 170 centimeters. Built for power. High-quality samurai armor. Weak points in armor. Head, inner bicep, thighs, groin, feet. Odachi, approximately 150 centimeters blade, 35 centimeters handle. Walks like a close combat specialist, probably knows how to use his fists and the sword. Ali. Relaxing marginally, Tamari actually looked at the other blonde in mild surprise. Kid had been a midget before, now he had 5 or so centimeters on her. When she'd last saw him, he'd just been a punk playing ninja, beating Gaara aside, he'd been a joke, now? Now he looked like a serious shinobi. The two groups stopped a couple feet from each other, and at this distance Tamari could feel the chakra being dumped into the armor in insane amounts. The young mont's eyes flicked up and down Tamari once, cool and analytical. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she was examined, then the feeling passed as his eyes flicked over her again, this time warm and appraising. The once over a young man gave an attractive woman and the Sunaku no Ichi could feel her cheeks warm just a bit. This entire exchange lasted about 2 seconds. Did you just get back? Nah, Naruto laced his fingers behind his head and smiled at Shikamaru. I only got back yesterday though. Hey, so, still an idiot or have you managed to change? Shikamaru smirked at the blonde, expecting an explosive answer. He didn't get one, instead, Naruto smiled warmly at him. I like to think I've grown up at least a little, nay? He shrugged some, his eyes closing as he smiled even wider. But I've tried to keep a bit of my idiocy. People always underestimate idiots, you know? One of Shikamaru's eyebrows went up and he glanced over at Sakura for confirmation. The girl just smiled a bit. He actually hasn't been all that bad since he's arrived, she shrugged. No idea how long that's going to last though. Hey, Sakura-chan. Naruto pouted at the girl, earning smiles from the others before he shook his head and turned to Shikamaru. What about you, Shika? You stopped being lazy yet? No. Naruto chuckled and turned to Tamari. You aren't bothered that he's like this? She raised a brow at him. Why would I be? There was just a hint of accusation in her voice. Ah, so she's attracted to him but they're not together, still. Backpedal, well unless my eyes deceive me. You're the one hanging out with him. And you don't really strike me as the type to just accept his dedication to laziness. The older girl acknowledged his point with a small nod. Sadly, I've got to deal with this lazy ass. She threw a small glare at the uncaring Chunin beside her. There's a Chunin exam soon, I'm just going back and forth between Suna and Konoha for meetings. Shikamaru picked up where she left off, and, it's troublesome, but I've become an examiner. So, the teen sighed and let his head loll to the side. I was told to go see off the messengers from Sand or something. Naruto blinked before a pensive smile settled on his face. Hey, a Chunin exam huh? Man, that brings back memories. The blonde hadn't missed the fact that Shikamaru had easily finished Temari's statement, nor that the Sunaku no Ichi had almost expected him to. They were closer than they would admit. Shikamaru smiled at Naruto. Yeah, it does. By the way, what are your plans? The confused look on Naruto's face almost spoke for itself. What do you mean Ibeo? The lazy nin rolled his eyes. What you say, sheesh? It's a chunin exam. Yeah? Now Shikamaru scowled. Naruto, the only one from our class who hasn't become a chunin, is you. Naruto slowly blinked. You're shitting me. Nope. The blonde turned to Sakura. Even you, Sakura-chan? His face became even more pitiful when the girl gave him a victory V. Aw man. I didn't even know I could enter this one. Gah. He ran his hands through his hair in agitation. Man, and here I was planning on riding along with whoever was still a genin. Damn, this sucks Ibeo. Shikamaru couldn't resist adding onto the blonde's irritation. Plus, Neji from the class above us, Kankuro of the Sand, and Tamari here are already Junin. Wad tilde? Man, you guys suck. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest with a huff, an exaggerated pout on his face. Tamari couldn't resist either, not to mention Gaara's the case cage. Naruto just tilted his head and gave her the, what do you think I am? Stupid? Yeah, so? I already knew that. I've been training abroad, not living under a rock or in some secluded mountain Ibeo. Sanagakure's been warned and are preparing. Their Anbu have been deployed to key points on the outskirts of the village. Even so, I wonder whether they'll be able to forcibly stop someone like me from entering their country. Tsunade and Kakashi exchanged a glance before turning back to Jiraiya, Tsunade taking the lead. Do you really think they'll start with something flashy like attacking the case cage? Jiraiya scowled. Based on the members we've been able to identify, it's quite possible, about half of them aren't exactly subtle. Kakashi's eye narrowed slightly in confusion. The Toad Sage nodded. I've been helping Naruto learn how to build his own spy network and teaching him how to infiltrate. Kid's actually pretty good at it. Naruto's actually better at maintaining an alternate identity than I am with his transformation and all. Tsunade nodded carefully. Did either of you find out their objective then? Jiraiya scowled. Nothing new unfortunately. All we know is that they're after the Jinchuriki. He shook his head slightly, staring off into space. Naruto was able to find and tag all of the other Jinchuriki, so we'll know when and if they go after them. The Hokage scowled, but nodded. You have a list of their members? Jiraiya nodded. Some, but not all. He pulled his notebook and pencil out of his vest and began to write. As far as we could tell, they operate in pairs. There's Deidara, former Iwa Nin, uses exploding clay, partner. Unknown. Jiraiya ripped off the page and tossed the ad hoc bingo book entry and rough sketch onto the table. Then there's Kakazu, former Taki Nin, seemingly immortal, takes something from his opponent's bodies, obsessed with money. His partner is Hidan, he's from Yugakure, another immortal. This one worships some bloody god called Jashin. 2 pages were tossed onto the desk. Jiraiya scowled and put his notebook away. The only other ones we know about are Hoshigaki Kisame and of course, Uchiha Itachi. The Sannin frowned. Unfortunately we haven't found anything new about those two. Tsunade gave the pages little more than a glance before pushing them over to Kakashi. What did Naruto contribute to this? Names. Jiraiya leaned back in his chair. The brat can play a woman surprisingly well. He had the brilliant idea to try and get the names and descriptions of all the village's missing nins and their ranks. Whenever he was questioned about his curiosity, he played the guilty ditz and usually said something like, Jiraiya did a horrible impression of a woman's voice. Oh, my boyfriend is kinda a bounty hunter. He sorta wants to know who to look out for and stuff, and I just wanna help him. The Toad Sage became serious again. I don't know how the kid pulled it off, but he did. He actually got lists of missing nin to look for as well as their rank and some basic info on them. He shook his head. Naruto worked the police and Anbu of every village we visited, hidden or not. I worked the seedier parts of town. Tsunade nodded again, glaring a hole in her desk for a long moment before turning her gaze back to her old teammate. You said there was something you needed to tell me in person. Jiraiya nodded, his face hardening even further. Naruto, the older man sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. I'll just start from the beginning. About 2 months into our trip, he made a new summoning contract. I don't really know how to feel about that. Tsunade, despite her agreement with the masked Junin, tried to get to the heart of the matter. So, this boss summon. Gnarl? Jiraiya nodded. It's been training Naruto as well? Another nod. The slug Sanin scowled. You also said this summon has been manipulating him. How and, more importantly, why? Jiraiya scowled as well. I don't know exactly why, but I think he wants Naruto to be the kind of leader he wants. He paused. The how is pretty simple. Whenever he wanted the boy to do something, it just told him that's what a good Hokage would do, at least, in the beginning. The Toad Sage frowned. By the time I confronted him about it, the summon had already had several uncontested months with the boy. The Sannin hesitated. By then, Naruto was considerably harder to manipulate. Gnarl had taken whatever urges the boy had to control things, and had done its best to blow them out of proportion. The man sighed, and for a long moment, looked his age. I did what I could. That statement brought up a number of bad memories for the aged hermit, not all of them related to Naruto. Tsunade knew that, and delicately coughed, breaking her old teammate out of his reverie. He shook his depression off and continued. The problem is, somewhere along the line, his goal shifted from become Hokage to be recognized, to be Hokage to better protect his friends. There was a brief silence before Kakashi hesitantly broke it. I don't see the problem. I never said he stopped having a control complex. Tsunade's mind immediately went to the worst-case scenario. Is he stable? Jiraiya hesitated, really hesitated before answering. Yes, Jiraiya, you asked if he was stable, and he is. The odds of him going crazy and defecting or directly damaging the village are almost nil. But, the white-haired Sannin winced, but I'm not sure he's entirely sane. The sentence hung in the air for a long moment before the Hokage leaned back into her chair and began rummaging through her desk. Neither of the men in the room were particularly surprised when she pulled out a bottle of sake, and both were thankful that she'd gotten several dishes. Her voice was tired as she poured the drinks. How bad is it? Bad, but not horrible. The kid seems to genuinely care for his friends at least. The white-haired Sannin accepted his dish of sake with a nod. The Hokage pushed Kakashi's bowl to him, considering her own empty dish for a moment. What's your assessment? The boy's dependent on the people he considers friends almost to the point of being a disorder. He paused, contemplating the sake in his cup. He's also shown signs of turning into a control freak. Tsunade decided to skip the cup and just sip sake straight from the bottle. Right now, the kid's about as normal as any current Konoha Junin. He's a nice guy who's got a couple mental issues and has his own way to cope with the shit he's done. Jiraiya paused to take another sip of sake. The kid will be Hokage someday, and a damn good one if he keeps this up. But I'm worried. Tsunade finished his sentence, that he'll turn into Orochimaru. Or, at least she tried to. No, not really, that boy's devoted to Konoha. I'm worried that he might become completely sociopathic in regards to his enemies, or worse, decide to control his friends, for their own good. Jiraiya shook his head slowly. I don't even know how many levels he works on at any particular moment. Anger tinged the Sannin's voice. Sometimes, he's thinking 10 steps ahead, others, he's just winging it and enjoying the moment. And I can't tell the difference. The Toad Sage downed the rest of his cup, trying desperately to get the bad taste out of his mouth. No. I'm not afraid the boy'll become another Orochimaru. I'm afraid he'll become another Danzo. After a pause, Jiraiya held his cup out for more. Tsunade took it from him and filled it. She considered the cup for a moment before keeping the cup, and handed Jiraiya the bottle. Nay, Sakura-chan? Yes, Naruto? The young woman looked over at her friend curiously. It had been the first time he'd spoke since they'd parted with Shikamaru and Tamari. The two of them had actually been walking to Ichiraku ramen at a comfortably sedate pace in pleasant silence. Just wanted to say, I'm glad to be back. The boy grinned at her and Sakura could feel a smile of her own forming. Naruto's smiles were infectious like that. I'm glad you're back too, Naruto. That had come out more affectionately than she'd intended. But instead of tripping, shouting, jumping, or any of the other things Sakura might have expected him to do, the blonde just smiled at her with a hint of pink on his cheeks. Thanks, Sakura-chan, and with that, he kept walking down the street as if nothing had happened. It was little things like that, small things that just kept popping up the longer she was around Naruto, that made her reconsider the image she'd labeled, Uzumaki Naruto, in her mind. In the past 2 years, she'd kept remembering Naruto like how he'd been when he'd left. She knew he'd change, but had never really been able to shake the image of a blonde, blue-eyed brat, the runt of the class, that horrendous neon orange jumpsuit, the dead last, and yet, The number one most surprising knucklehead. Whenever she'd taken the time to daydream about the future, Naruto had always been included how he was. She'd thought he'd always be short, loud, obnoxious, and yet sincere. Nice, friendly, and a bit naive, but always immature and kinda perverted. He'd changed. Sakura hadn't even realized she'd fallen in a half-step behind him until he'd glanced back at her. He'd lead, and she'd followed. It had been instinctive, natural. She'd known Naruto had a way with people, Gaara and Neji were proof of that, but she really hadn't experienced it until just then. This Naruto was confident, self-assured, but not haughty or conceited, despite her earlier admonishments. He didn't swagger or strut down the street as he might have when they were younger. Instead, he walked with an easy and controlled gait, his thumbs hooked loosely in his pockets. He actually looked like a serious shinobi now. He might have kept the orange, but he didn't stick out like a sore thumb anymore. It wasn't that garish shade it had been before. He'd gone with a darker, more muted shade of orange for the pieces of armor. That, combined with the intricate pattern of black stripes, almost made him look like a tiger. He'd even kept that spiral he always wore. The stripes on the cuirass and shoulder guards actually led into a black swirl. The scarf was new though. She'd never taken Naruto for a scarf guy, but after wrapping it around his neck twice and tossing the ends over either shoulder, it definitely offset his armor nicely. Though she wondered why he wore it, especially considering how everything on the outfit had a use. Shanaru, I can think of a couple uses. It'd probably hold up just fine no matter how much we bucked and scria. Sakura pointedly ignored the voice in her head. Naruto would have had a hard time being happier. Here he was, going out on a pseudo-date with the girl who wasn't just his best friend, but also his crush, and he'd admitted to himself, it was a crush at the moment, nothing more, and they were going to quite possibly the best restaurant, ever. At least in his opinion. The girl made a good showing against Kakashi-sensei, her raw power had been staggering. Her speed was lacking though, maybe if he got her to wear some weights. The blonde was about to make the suggestion when a flash of indigo and white caught his eyes. Nay, indigo and white, Naruto blinked. Why would I notice? Oh yeah. Hinata-chan. A happy grin spread across his face as he changed course. Sakura'd understand. Even if she'd roll her eyes or something, she'd understand. In another time and place, Naruto had gone through his training work to the bone. His body pushed to its absolute limits, pushed so hard that his clothes had literally frayed to the point of almost falling off, but he hadn't worked his mind. He hadn't given a retelling of his life several times over. He hadn't had to describe every member of his class in as much detail as he could rack his mind for. He hadn't been forced to remember why he'd been so determined to fight Neji, and who had encouraged him when his confidence had faltered. He hadn't remembered the kindness Hinata had shown him. That Naruto hadn't learned that she'd almost been turned into a slave. Almost had her eyes plucked out. Almost been turned into a brood mare. Thankfully for one particular Hyuga, this was not that world. Hinata was, put simply, having a small panic attack. In Naruto-kun's back? Okay, a big panic attack. She'd been on her way to the Yamanaka flower shop after training to see if they'd gotten that blue rose she'd ordered for her pressed flower collection. It had been a nice, simple day, until a shock of blonde hair had caught her eye from across the street. Now, Hinata wasn't obsessed with a certain blonde genin. Infatuated certainly, but she'd grown out of her admittedly borderline stalker tendencies, that she wouldn't admit were more than borderline, by the time she'd graduated from the academy. However, blonde wasn't a common hair color in Konoha, let alone in that shade, and even fewer at that length. The Yamanaka clan usually wore theirs considerably longer. So when a single splotch of bright yellow hair flashed through the sparse numbers of people, she'd looked over on the off chance that it might be Naruto-kun. If it was, she might be able to walk over and start up a conversation, maybe give a hint to her feelings for him, or even ask him out. She didn't really believe any of that, but it was a nice thought. And if it wasn't, which was far more likely, she'd just keep walking and forget about the whole deal. She just hadn't expected it to actually be him. There, within 17.3 feet, was Uzumaki Naruto. There wasn't a thing in the world that would make Hinata forget those whisker marks and grin. She wasn't ready. She hadn't even put on any makeup today. Her jacket still had grass stains and smudges of dirt. And she didn't know what she was going to say or what she was going to do or anything. And he was getting closer. He turned slightly and said something to the person beside him, bringing her attention to his companion. What little coherent activity in Hinata's brain came crashing to a halt. He was with Sakura-san. She'd lost her chance. The pinkette had asked Naruto-kun out and was going on a date with him now, and Naruto-kun was forever out of her reach. Her shyness had been her undoing. The boy she'd grown to love was now taken and she couldn't do anything about it. All her waiting, all her training, all the time she'd spent gathering her courage had been wasted because she hadn't gotten to him first. Then Naruto-kun's head started to turn back in her direction. There was no way she could face him now. She'd immediately ducked into a small alley to escape his presence. With her back pressed up against the cold stone, Hinata began to calm. The more rational part of her brain finally forced its way through her hormones and self-esteem issues, pointing out that Sakura-san was Naruto-kun's teammate. Of course they'd be together if he'd just gotten back. It didn't matter whether they liked each other or not. They still had to catch up with the time they'd missed. Then a little rush of happiness ran through her. Naruto-kun was back. Obsessed? Maybe a bit, but she was really just infatuated, really. Naruto-kun? Hinata pressed her hands over her heart, trying to still the fluttering of her heart. She closed her eyes and took a deep, calming breath. He's back. Her rather meager courage gathered. She opened her eyes. There he was. Nay, Hinata-chan. Why'd you hide over here? Hinata-chan. The poor girl promptly passed out. Naruto? Sakura walked up and peered over the blonde's shoulder. He'd suddenly changed direction and started moving faster, and she was curious as to why. Naruto eased himself down to his knees and glanced back at her. Nay, Sakura-chan. He shifted, and there in his arms was an unconscious Hyuga. Hinata, could you check her? She just passed out when I said hi. I wasn't even that close. Sakura's eyebrow began to twitch. Naruto. What? The blonde nin hooked an arm under Hinata's knees, the other wrapping around her shoulder blades. I'm serious. That crap ain't normal. He stood again, taking the girl with him and shifting slightly. As he did so, the Hyuga's head rested on his shoulder. This time the medic nin blinked before giving Naruto a warning glare. Naruto, what are you doing? The boy actually glared at her, and Sakura took a reflexive step back. No accusing me of being a pervert for this. I'm not about to leave a lady lying unconscious on the ground without real good reason. Especially not one of my friends. Sakura's mouth pressed into a thin line for a moment before she nodded. He definitely had a point, and it made plenty of sense. So why'd she reacted so violently? 'Cause he's mine and I ain't lettin' no Hyuga steal him away. Shanuru. This voice was pointedly ignored. Sakura? The girl shook herself just a bit and forced her attention back to her teammate. Could you give Hinata-chan a once-over, seriously? Yeah, Naruto, sorry about that. She put her hands over the unconscious Hyuga, pushing the green medical chakra from her palms. The boy smiled at her gently. It's no problem, just don't always assume what I'm doing is pervy, K. The corners of her mouth quirked up. I'll try. Hinata shifted in the chair. She'd been having the most wonderful dream. She'd defended Naruto-kun from a horrible enemy and confessed her feelings to the blonde. Together, they'd been victorious over their foe and, caught up in the thrill of their victory, Naruto-kun had kissed her. The dream had been winding down when she started to wake. Naruto-kun had swept her up in his arms and carried her off to get married. It was all completely impossible, of course, but that didn't mean it was a bad dream. The Hyuga girl shifted in the chair, slowly waking up as she tried to remember when she'd fallen asleep in a chair. She didn't really want to wake up though. The chair was warm and comfy, it wasn't too hard and it wasn't too squishy, it supported her back nicely and cradled her head just so. A soft sigh escaped the young woman as she snuggled into the chair. It even smelled good. In her half-awake state, the thought of seeing if it tasted good too flashed through her head, but she dismissed it as being just a little too silly. The chair's heartbeat even had a nice, steady writhe. Wait, heartbeat? Hinata's eyes snapped open and she stiffened, making her chair chuckle. Nay, Hinata-chan, don't pass out like that on me again, K? You had me worried there for a second. Naruto-kun. Oi, Naruto, be nice. He pouted, his bottom lip sticking out. Nay, Sakura-chan. I'm trying to be Ibeo. Hinata pulled her head off of Naruto-kun's shoulder, swallowing down her panic as best she could as she stared at the blonde's face. Naruto-kun was carrying her. He was holding her to his chest and everything. She clenched her hands and made herself look away, fighting the embarrassment and mortification that threatened to overwhelm her. "Nay, Hinata-chan, you alright?" the Hyuga squeaked and her eyes snapped back to his face. Why yes and Naruto-kun. I'm fine. Oh good, he smiled at her, not one of those fake ones she'd seen plastered on his face so often when he was younger, a real smile, directed at her no less. Then Hinata noticed the familiar twinkle in his eyes as his smile melted into a foxy grin. "Then would you mind easing up on your grip? You're kinda strangling me here." Hinata blinked once in confusion before her eyes darted to her hands, which were fisted in the blonde scarf of black silk and tugging on it slightly. The boy chuckled softly, his eyes shutting briefly in his amusement. A growl distracted the Hyuga from her embarrassment. "Naruto." Sakura-san was shaking a fist in Naruto-kun's direction. The boy laughed just a bit at that before sticking his tongue out at his teammate. Alright, sheesh. He turned his cerulean eyes back to her. "Sorry bout teasing you like that, Hinata-chan. Any way I can make it up to you? Hold me close and never let go?" It's alright and Naruto-kun. I understand." He pouted at her and a brief, irrationally bold urge to kiss his pouting lips surged through her before she squashed it down. "But I probably carried you off away from where you were going. If you want to help with that you'll have to put her down, genius." The pinkette's comment made both teens pout slightly, but Naruto still bent over and set the girl in his arms down. "Nay, sorry bout that, Hinata-chan. Where were you going anyways?" The blonde tilted his head to the side as he took a step back to give her some space. Though thankful that her crush had given her some breathing room, Hinata's still began to press together, though now at her waist instead of under her chin. It's okay Naruto-kun. I was just going by Yamanaka-san's shop to check on something. It wasn't that important." She glanced away, unable to meet Naruto-kun's eyes. Unfortunately for her, while Naruto had gotten considerably better at consciously reading people's body language, he misread the subtext as such. "It actually was kinda important, but I'm honestly too nice to try and impose." "Really? It's nice that you're trying to make it up to me, but I really don't need it, honest." Actually, Naruto was almost right on the money except for gauging the importance of what Hinata had been doing. "Gah, that's in the complete opposite direction. Now I've got to make it up to you somehow." Hinata flushed, and no. It's okay Naruto-kun. Why you don't have to do anything." Naruto, however, was determined. He'd realized that even though Hinata had been nicer to him than anyone except for Iruka-sensei, Hokage Oji-san, and possibly Naruto hadn't done much of anything for her. He hadn't even properly thanked her for most of the things she'd done. And now here was a perfect excuse to be nice to the girl. No way he was going to just let this go. The boy pouted as cutely as he could, putting on his best puppy dog eyes, clasped his hands in front of his chest, and said with complete sincerity, "But I want to." Hinata didn't stand a chance. Alright? Naruto-kun." Naruto's hands shot up into the air, making Hinata giggle. "Yes." Sakura chose this moment to interject. "Yeah, so how are you going to do that, genius?" The genin's happy face fell. Crap, hadn't thought of that. His arms came down and he began to ponder. His eyes scrunched up, his left hand went to rubbing his chin and right cupped his left elbow. He stayed like that for a long moment before his strikingly blue eyes snapped open. "Nay, Hinata-chan, have you had lunch yet?" No Naruto-kun. Not yet." A brief surge of hope ran through the girl before getting squashed by the more rational part of her mind. Naruto wasn't about to ask her out on a date if he was spending time with Sakura. Man was she off. The blonde smiled, pulling out of his pondering pose. "How about I buy lunch then?" Really? Naruto chuckled. "Sure. Sakura-chan and I were going to be catching up over lunch anyways and I'd love it if you came along too." The genin hooked his thumbs in his pockets and smiled warmly at Hinata. "Paying for your lunch would be the least I could do since I'd be taking you away from your plans for the day." Hinata's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before her attention snapped over to Sakura, the question in her eyes. The pinkette shrugged. "Sure, why not? It'd be nice to catch up with you anyways, and it's not like we were on a date or anything." Neither girl knew whether Sakura was simply stating a fact, or making a subtle jab at Hinata for intruding upon said, not date. Still, Hinata decided to accept the words at face value this time, and turned back towards the blonde, nodding happily. "I'd love to, and Naruto-kun." He beamed at the girls. Great. To Ichiraku Ramen we go. And with a short laugh, strode confidently down the street, the girls falling into step behind him automatically. Then, Naruto hesitated, a pensive look crossing his face. What is it, Naruto? Did I just do what I think I did? The girls exchanged a glance before turning back to the blonde. What do you mean, Naruto-kun? Naruto stopped in the middle of the street, scowling into space. Did I seriously just get a date with two beautiful women at the same time? He glanced back at each reddening girl in turn. Holy shit. I did. His arms shot up into the air. Awesome. There was a very long pause as a similar thought went through both girls' heads. A date? With Naruto-kun. Naruto-kun. Thud. Ah. Hinata-chan. Not again. Naruto. Ah. Sakura-chan. Not the face. Not the face. Sakura-chan. I said I was sorry. The pink-haired girl harumphed and crossed her arms, turning away from her teammate pointedly. She didn't stop walking beside him though. Hinata couldn't help the giggle that escaped her at Naruto-kun's absurdly pitiful look. If she'd thought it serious for a second, she'd have been admonishing Sakura-san in an instant. But right before he'd started pouting at his teammate's back, he'd thrown a wink at her. She might not have been as good at reading people as her cousin, but Hinata had been trained as any other Hyuga in the arts of reading the subtle tics of someone's body language. And even she, the failure and outcast of the Hyuga, could read Sakura-san like a book. The girl was more embarrassed than anything else, and her anger had faded after the first couple of minutes. Now she was just doing this for fun. Hinata might have been angry if the girl had been doing it and Naruto-kun hadn't known she was playing. But he did, and the two of them almost made it a comedy routine. Naruto-kun's eyes narrowed a bit at Sakura-san's latest rebuttal, almost saying, "Oh? So that's how you want to play it, huh?" Then, that dangerous tinkle appeared again. Naruto-kun did a little spin, pirouette, thing, and ended up in front of Sakura-san. As he walked backwards, he clasped his hands beneath his chin and sent a sad, soulful look in the pinkette's direction. The girl wavered for a moment, but stood strong, raising her chin higher in the air, though it was obvious she wasn't trying to smile. Then Naruto-kun brought out the big guns. His lower lip quivered and the blonde's voice was woefully sad. "Do you hate me, Sakura-chan?" Hinata was sorely tempted to smack Sakura-san to get her to forgive him, and the look wasn't even directed at her. Hinata had to cover her smile with a hand. That was fighting dirty. The look on Sakura-san's face was priceless. She was trapped and she knew it. Admitting she didn't hate the blonde would mean she'd lost the little game they'd been playing, but there was no way she could tell Naruto-kun she hated him, especially to that face. Sakura was saved from having to answer the question by a collision. Namely, of Naruto into a poor bystander who was window shopping at the time. None of their little group had noticed the person standing in front of the store. Naruto had been too focused on pouting at Sakura. Sakura had been focused on trying to think of a way out of her predicament, and Hinata had been too focused on both of them, mostly Naruto. Naruto and the young man he'd ran into turned to apologize at the same time, pausing when the other looked familiar. Hinata and Sakura had recognized the boy Naruto had run into instantly, though it took both of them a long moment to recognize each other. Naruto. Ah, Choji. Naruto's face had just started to break out into a smile when the larger boy swept him up in a hug, actually lifting him off the ground for a moment. Naruto didn't know how to respond to that, and it showed on his face when Choji set him down. Deprived of any meaningful physical contact for much of his life, the boy just didn't know what to do. Choji, far more insightful than some people would assume, noticed the blonde's discomfort and made an educated guess how to ease it. "You." The large boy assumed an exaggerated pose, pointing a finger accusingly at a now startled Naruto. Blinking, Naruto pointed to himself. "Yes, you disgrace the beauty of armor." Choji assumed an exaggerated kabuki stance, a feat in of itself, one hand held back high above his head, the other still pointing at the blonde in front of him. "Armor is only meant to be worn by the pleasantly plump. You with your wiry muscles are not worthy of such beauty as armor." Naruto blinked again before a grin spread across his face. He quickly tried to cover it with an angry scowl, but it didn't work. You insult me. You dare to say that I am not worthy of armor. You, sir, disgrace the beauty of armor." Choji blinked once before a hand slapped to his chest, aghast. "Me? Who are you to accuse me of disgracing the beauty of armor? The corner of the blonde's mouth couldn't stop twitching as he fought his grateful smile. Who am I? Who am I? The blonde began a little dance that some would recognize as Jiraiya's own introduction skit. I am the Orange Maelstrom. The man of many armies. The unpredictable ninja. I am Uzumaki Naruto, future Hokage, and I question your choice. Not of armor, but of color. The large ninja gasped in mock horror. You question the color? Of my armor? You fiend. Biwu ahahaha. By this point there weren't too many people in the audience that could keep a straight face as Naruto planted his fists on his hips and laughed into the sky. Yes. I question your choice of color. Silver upon red are not the colors a shinobi should wear. At this one, Choji's eyebrow actually twitched. No. That is where I draw the line. I shall not stand for my beautiful armor to be disgraced in such a fashion by you. I challenge you, Uzumaki Naruto. For a brief instant, everyone felt as if the larger ninja was serious. Then he continued, to an eating contest. The groans could be heard several streets over. Naruto pretended to be serious, as my right is the challenged. I declare our weapons of choice to be the delicious ramen at Ichiraku Ramen. Choji nodded, seriousness radiating from his every pore. Then I shall decide the time. Tonight, at sunset. Do not be late, Naruto. I'll be there, Choji. Believe it. Naruto, you are such an idiot. The blonde waved a hand dismissively. Nah, Sakura-chan. You're just jealous of my amazing people skills. Sakura-san rolled her eyes and shook her head. Oh, certainly, Naruto. I'm totally jealous of your ability to shout out at the top of your lungs. What about you, Hinata? Are you jealous of Naruto's ability to say stupid things real loud? Hinata suppressed her giggles long enough to send a sly glance at Sakura-san. I don't think so, Sakura-san. Choji-kun did challenge Naruto-kun to a duel. Naruto-kun grabbed his chest, a gasp escaping him. No. Not you too, Hinata-chan. You wound me so. He grasped at the air for a moment. No, it's all fading away. It's going dark, and promptly fell over, his tongue lolling out of his mouth. While Hinata had to cover her mouth with both hands to keep her giggles contained, a very unladylike snort escaped Sakura-san even as she smiled. Naruto. The blonde's head immediately snapped up, a wide grin on his face. Hey, it's got you laughing, doesn't it? Shaking her head, the pinkette walked over to Naruto-kun, hooking her fingers into the front of his cuirass and pulling him up off the ground. Yeah, but I'm ashamed of myself for it. Naruto-kun stuck his tongue out at her as she set him on his feet. Hinata knew that Choji-kun had acted silly to try and alleviate Naruto-kun's discomfort. But as Naruto-kun dusted himself off, she tried to figure out why the larger ninja had chose Naruto-kun's armor. Maybe it was because their armors were surprisingly similar? Actually, that might have been it. While the colors were very different, the actual styles were reasonably similar. Naruto-kun's shoulder plates were larger and he'd foregone the thigh guards in favor of a pair of greaves, but otherwise there were few differences. That and his cuirass was much more form-fitting. She meant absolutely no offense to Choji-kun with the thought, but it was quite a bit more attractive on Naruto-kun. Nay, Sakura-chan? Yeah, Naruto? Any chance we could put the date off till dinner? If I want to beat Choji, I'm going to have to save up space. The blonde patted his stomach and smiled shyly at the pinkette. Sakura-san shook her head but smiled at him. Sorry, Naruto, as much as I would love to see you stuff your face as fast as you can, I've got a shift at the hospital tonight, so maybe later when we don't have a mission. Naruto-kun blinked before smiling at her. It's alright, Sakura-chan, I understand. Both Sakura-san and Hinata blinked at that. Naruto-kun hadn't just accepted that Sakura-san couldn't join him, he'd accepted it. There hadn't been any sadness or rejection in his tone, but pride? Happiness for Sakura-san? Hinata couldn't tell. She'd never heard that tone from Naruto-kun before. Apparently neither had Sakura-san. Naruto, the pinkette suddenly gave him an affectionate smile. You really have grown, haven't you? I'd like to think so, Sakura-chan. I really would. As Naruto and her waved goodbye to Sakura-san, Hinata just knew the blonde was about to apologize to her. Hey, sorry about that, Hinata-chan, and she hadn't been wrong. Now he was going to explain nicely that he didn't really want to go out to eat without Sakura-san. Sakura-san's kinda right. Even if I pay for it, making you watch me stuff my face wouldn't be a good apology. He's trying to let me down gently, You really are a kind person, aren't you, Naruto-kun? She smiled gently at him. It's alright, Naruto-kun. It's no problem, even as her heart was breaking. Nah, it's not right to keep a lady waiting, so I'll just have to take you somewhere nicer later, K? Hinata had actually opened her mouth to reply to what she'd known Naruto-kun was going to say before his words registered, and her thought processes came to a crashing halt. Did Naruto-kun just ask me on a date? Naruto-kun, there was no way. He couldn't have just asked her of all people out on a date. She was the Hyuga failure. Her little sister had taken her spot as clan heir. Her little sister that she'd never beaten. Naruto-kun had to be doing this out of some sense of regret, or duty. Yes, that was it. He was doing this because he'd felt he'd wronged her. She might not have much in the way of pride, but she wouldn't take Naruto-kun's pity. No, it's okay, Naruto-kun. Why you don't have to do anything like that. She tried to make her voice strong, but it came out horribly weak and high-pitched, that and her face was probably turning 10 different shades of red by now. She was just mortified with herself. He blinked and Hinata watched his face, reading the emotions that ran across it in the brief moment before he answered. One eyebrow went up and his eyes narrowed in confusion, his blue eyes studying her and her expression. Then both his eyebrows went up and his eyes returned to their normal size as he seemed to understand. Then his smile widened and a familiar twinkle appeared in his eyes. He turned his face slightly to the side and his chin down, a smirk appearing on his lips. In that moment, with the afternoon sun playing across his tanned skin and making his already bright eyes shine, Naruto was simultaneously the most beautiful and handsome thing Hinata had ever seen. You're forgetting something important, Hinata-chan. He drew out every syllable of her name slowly, making her blush darken with every sound. It took her almost 10 seconds to realize that he wanted an answer. What is that, Naruto-kun? The whiskered blonde leaned in, pressing the tip of his index finger to her nose. I want to. Hinata fainted. I really should have expected that, he sighed as his fingers played with the unconscious Hyuga's bangs. The girl had fainted the last time he'd gotten that close. What had made him think it wouldn't happen this time? Nothing, he hadn't really been thinking about it that much in the first place. Naruto scowled slightly when the girl had insisted that he didn't have to buy her a nice dinner. He'd been afraid that she wasn't willing to spend time with him without other people like Sakura nearby. But he'd noticed the slight, probably unconscious, emphasis on the word, have. After a brief instant of puzzling over that, he'd remembered that this was the one girl that had been nice to him before his trip with Jiraiya-san. It was a large part of why he was trying to be nice to her actually. But remembering that and how happy she'd seemed when he'd invited her to lunch, it just hadn't seemed likely that she would turn down his offer of a date. So he decided to take her words at face value. She didn't want him to do this because he felt he had to. Which, while he did, was only part of the equation. He'd reminded her of the other part. The part where he actually wanted to spend time with Hinata. And he really did. She'd never been anything but kind to him, and she was cute too. She'd really grown over the past 2 years. Physically she'd matured more than Sakura. Naruto liked the sound of her laughter and she was really cute when her cheeks were a softer shade of pink. Though he really worried for her health when her entire face turned tomato red. It looked like it was going to be fun trying to figure out just how much he could tease her before she fainted. Her outfit though, it needed black and orange if he could manage it, and he still needed to evaluate her abilities. Naruto ever so briefly cursed the training that Gnarl had given him. He didn't want to think about this, he wanted to just enjoy spending time with his friend. But just spending time with her wouldn't keep her safe. A good friend would think about this, would help their friends be stronger, would protect them. Hinata had been kinder to him than even Sakura, his teammate. Only Iruka-sensei and Gnarl had been kinder, only they would be saved before Hinata. Naruto considered her his friend. He would protect Hinata, no matter what. Naruto's fingers slowly traced the contours of her face. It was harder, stronger than he'd remembered, but she still kept a bit of baby fat. It made her face smooth and rounded just a hint. He liked it. She made it look good, almost angelic? No, not angelic. Gnarl had shown him pictures of angels, and while they were beautiful, they looked so cold, hard, imperious, snooty. Hinata looked like none of that. She looked like the child of a fae, one of the creatures of magic that embodied nature. He liked that analogy. Nature was beautiful, dangerous, but man had subjugated much of its power. And Naruto would do the same with her. If she was weak, he would bring her under his control, bring her under the embrace of the ninja overlord as he had with the power of life force or as man had domesticated the dog. If she was too strong, too wild, too much a greater force of nature for him to control, then he would be content knowing that even if he could not protect or strengthen her, she would be strong enough on her own. Naruto was afraid that Sakura fell into the latter category, or, at least her anger did. He'd expected to get hit or slapped when he'd first made those comments to Konohamaru. He just hadn't expected Sakura to be able to hit as hard as she did. An angry Sakura is almost as scary as a serious Jiraiya-san, unbidden. The image of Sakura punching the ground in the beginning of their match with Kakashi-senpai came to mind. At least she didn't hit me that hard. Since then, he'd avoided getting her that angry or teasing her to the point that she reacted violently to cover it up. He was happy to note that the girl was harder to anger than he remembered, or at least she seemed more willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. The latter was most likely considering that he was more sensitive and, well, less of a loud dumbass than she remembered. He'd made a reasonably good, second first impression, if her comment about him, going and destroying her newfound respect for him, was anything to go by. First impressions counted for a lot. Naruto's fingers slid from Hinata's face to slowly run through her hair, almost unconsciously. Weights would be good for Sakura. She could wear them while working at the hospital with no problem and they would increase her speed greatly, though maybe not her strength, not that it needs it. If I'm remembering my chakra theory correctly, then much of her strength is based off the concussive force of properly applied chakra being channeled through her bones and muscles to be converted almost entirely into kinetic energy. And since her chakra control is already perfect, it's unlikely that her strength would increase due to wearing weights. A curious thought went through his head. Unless her ability to convert chakra to kinetic energy is based on her musculature, then the weights would help with her strength as well. The blonde blinked in contemplation before shuddering. Now that was a scary thought. Sakura stronger than she was already? Terrifying. A soft, bell-like sigh made Naruto's attention snap back to the girl beside him. His hand had gotten around to cradling her cheek in his palm and his thumb had been running back and forth over her lips. Bad hand. Bad. Thankfully the girl hadn't awoken just yet. But, was she kissing his thumb? A slight shade of pink settled onto Naruto's face and he slowly pulled his hand away from the sleeping girl's face, a small smile appearing on his face when she tried to nuzzle into his palm as it was pulled away. Naruto put both of his hands into his lap and intended to keep them there this time. No more touching the cute girl, no matter how much he wanted to. After she'd passed out, he'd carried her to one of the parks near the center of Konoha. He didn't know when she'd wake up and didn't know whether she'd want to go home, which may or may not be in the Hyuga complex, to the Yamanaka flower shop, or stay with him as he waited for sundown, which was actually pretty close by now. Training Field 3 was on the opposite side of Konoha from Ichiraku Ramen, and at the pace Sakura and him had set, they would have gotten there by lunchtime. Thing was, running into Shikamaru and Tamari, then a fainting Hinata, then Choji. It had almost been 1 o'clock by the time Sakura had left to go to the hospital. Now, he was sitting on one end of an out-of-the-way bench with Hinata stretched out beside him. He'd taken off his normally ever-present scarf and bunched it up beneath her head to give her some version of a pillow. He'd been tempted, oh so tempted, to lay her head on his lap, but he'd learned that even though he could get away with more perverted things than Jiraiya-san usually could, less was almost always more when it came to women. An appreciative glance here or there to let them know he found them attractive, real smiles, and the occasional compliment went a lot farther than Jiraiya-san's methods, as long as he wasn't trying to get them into his bed. Then Jiraiya-san's real methods were actually pretty damn good, but Naruto still didn't like them. He did not want a woman just to warm his bed. Naruto glanced at the girl beside him. She seemed to finally be waking up, and he had trouble identifying the emotion that pressed upon him ever so slightly. Darn? Naruto-kun? Whoa, he'd never heard someone say his name like that before. Soft, breathy, affectionate, he was sorely tempted to see if he could get her to say it like that just so he could hear it again. Sadly, the Hyuga's face scrunched up just a bit before her eyes fluttered open. A cross between a scowl and pout appeared on her face, her lips pursing in confusion. Naruto beamed at her. She really was cute, morning Hinata-chan. She blinked a couple times in confusion before realization dawned on her face and she shot up, her face quickly approaching tomato red. Naruto-kun. Naruto couldn't help it. He laughed just a bit at the look on her face. Why yes, Hinata-chan. I am sorry. The girl quickly bowed in apology, a little awkwardly since she was sitting at the time. The blonde couldn't help but shake his head at her. What for, Hinata-chan? I don't remember you doing anything you need to apologize for. But, Hinata-chan, all I remember is running into my friend, taking her away from her plans for the day, and carrying her around because I made her faint. He smiled warmly at the Hyuga. Her mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before her chin tucked in towards her chest, her face a brilliant shade of pink. Oh okay. Naruto-kun. With a grin at her, Naruto picked up his now unused scarf. As he unfolded it from its ad hoc pillow transformation, he discovered a suspicious strand of blue-black hair and smiled a bit as he pulled the strand out of the folds of the scarf. Hinata was mortified. Not only had she fainted in front of Naruto-kun a third time in a single day, but he'd taken more of his time to carry her somewhere and make sure she was okay. He must think her a pathetic kunoichi, fainting at every chance she had. He had to be wondering how she could stand up in a fight if she couldn't even stay conscious. He kept saying that he wanted to do this, or that it was no bother, or that it wasn't her fault, but she knew better. It had always been her fault before and it was now. To be honest, she wasn't even aware that he'd pulled a hair of hers off his scarf when she blurted out, "I am sorry." The blonde looked over at her curiously. Nay? But I like your hair, Hinata-chan. This had been so far off of what Hinata's mind had been focused on, she did little more than repeat the statement as a question. Why you like my hair? Back in the academy, the gossip mill had been running amok on what Uchiha Sasuke liked. One of the more prevalent ones had been that he'd liked long hair, so, assuming that since Naruto-kun was the opposite of Sasuke-san, Naruto-kun must like short hair. What none of the girls had known was that this was actually the complete opposite of how things were, something Sakura-san had found out while on a team with both boys. Sasuke-san actually liked short hair, while Naruto-kun liked it longer. Immediately after finding this out, Hinata had started to grow her hair out, hoping that, just maybe, when Naruto-kun got back, it'd be enough for him to notice her. And it had worked? Yeah, the blonde nodded at her even as he wrapped his scarf back around his shoulders. I like it better than the duck butt style you had before. Hinata's blush deepened further at the, sadly accurate, assessment of her hairstyle over 2 years ago. His eyes closed in a thoughtful look as he tossed the ends of the scarf over each shoulder. I mean, it was cute on you and all, but with your hair long you look. He paused, searching for the right word. Don't faint, don't faint, don't faint, don't faint, don't faint, don't faint, don't faint. A warm smile spread across his face. You look like a young Yuki Onna. Hinata blinked. He'd called her a beautiful ice spirit. Slowly a small, embarrassed smile of her own appeared on her face. Thank you. Naruto-kun. Gah, she's too cute. You're sure you want to come? I mean, Sakura-chan was right. This is going to mostly be Choji and me stuffing our faces. It's okay, Naruto-kun. I don't mind. I haven't had lunch yet either, and I want to spend as much time with you as I can. Then let me apologize now if we make you lose your appetite. He grinned sheepishly at her as they walked, his hands stuffed into his pockets. She smiled. It's okay, Naruto-kun. I don't think it'll bother me much. I can stand a little mess to be with you. He paused just outside the awnings of their destination and, for the briefest of moments, there was a look of utter seriousness on his face. I'm just hoping I don't scare you off. Hinata blinked at the blonde, but he ducked into the ramen stand before she could respond. You'll never scare me off. Naruto-kun. Taking a deep breath, Hinata ducked under the awning of the ramen shop after the blonde. Naruto smiled at the already seated Choji, who smiled right back. They both knew they didn't really have to do this, but they both wanted to. Hey, it was Ichiraku ramen, of course they wanted to. What, no moral support? Ino said she didn't want to see me stuff my face, and Shikamaru said it'd be too troublesome. The larger nin smiled warmly at Naruto. Though I see you brought your own. A nod towards the Hyuga. Good evening, Hinata-san. Good evening, Choji-kun. Hinata bowed slightly in greeting before following Naruto's example and taking a stool, taking the one on Naruto's right on the other side of him from Choji. Oi, Oji-san. Wha? Who's calling me old? The owner of the stand popped out from the kitchen, but the beginnings of a glare that were on his face quickly disappeared once he recognized the speaker. Ha! Ayame, come look who's here. Huh? What do you mean? The brown-haired girl popped out right behind her father, taking a moment to recognize the wildly grinning blonde at the counter. But once she did, she broke out into a wide smile. Naruto. Hey OG-san, Ayame-chan. Naruto threw his arms out wide, careful not to hit the two people on either side of him. I'm back. The girl laughed happily. Looks like I can open that college fund again, Naruto stuck his tongue out at the girl. Teuchi smiled, clapping his hands together once. This calls for a celebration. First bowls on the house. However, Naruto waved it off, much to the surprise of both chefs. Nah, I'll have to take a rain check on that bowl. I'm here for a competition. The two chefs shared a glance, looked back at Naruto, shared another glance, looked back and noticed an Akamichi beside their favorite customer, then shared another, final glance. I'll start the noodles. Ayame disappeared back into the kitchen as Teuchi went to the counter, pulling a notepad and pencil from the pouch on his apron. What'll you two be having for this contest? The two contestants glanced at one another, Naruto speaking first. Miso, pork, chicken, repeat. Choji considered this for a moment before nodding in agreement, and Naruto turned towards his other companion. What about you, Hinata-chan, does pork sound okay? She nodded quickly at that, a small hint of pink on her cheeks. Naruto grinned at her before blinking and turning back to Choji. Loser pays? At his nod, Naruto turned to Teuchi. The loser will pay for us, and I'll be paying for Hinata-chan. Said girl flushed a darker shade of red, and the owner raised an eyebrow at the blonde, a mischievous grin on his aged face. Naruto gave him a surprisingly eloquent glare. Don't even think about it. Intelligently, the older man didn't say anything about that and instead yelled back into the kitchen. Miso, pork and chicken. And lots of it. Ooh. Hinata stared at the two boys beside her. She'd known that Naruto could eat a lot, and that Choji ate a lot regularly, but to actually see it, without using the Byakugan to spy on the blonde from afar, was something else entirely. How they fit it all. Especially Naruto, considering that he'd won, in an eating contest, against an Akamichi. The blonde was absolutely amazing. In a surprising victory of 41 bowls to 39, Uzumaki Naruto had out-eaten Akamichi Choji. A small crowd had actually gathered to watch and started betting by the 10th bowls. Now money was being exchanged back and forth as the two boys groaned. Choji's armor had enough give to it to contain his slightly larger girth, but Naruto had had to loosen the straps on his more form-fitting armor to accommodate his distended stomach. Naruto let his face drop into his empty bowl even as Choji groaned. Hinata had finished her bowl before the boys had even got to bowl 5, but the teenagers had actually eaten with surprising decorum. It could be expected of the noble-raised Hinata to eat daintily, but the boys, by some unspoken agreement, had eaten quickly, but cleanly. There hadn't been any flying noodles or splashing of broth, thankfully. Choji struggled with his pouches till he pulled out his butterfly-themed wallet. Naruto, very briefly, considered poking fun at it, but decided that it was not a good idea to seriously bad-mouth the 90-some-odd kilograms, 200 pounds, of solid muscle and armor beside him. It'd be like picking on a sumo wrestler just because he decided to wear a pink shirt. You just don't do it. Still, nay, Choji? The larger nin paused in his counting of bowls and calculation of expenses. Yeah, Naruto. He grinned at his large friend. I was just going to give this to you when the group got together again, but you can consider this your consolation prize. The blonde rummaged around in the pouch at his hip before pulling out a small scroll. Here, for being a good sport. The chubby nin blinked in mild confusion before taking the scroll carefully, wary of any pranks. He slowly unfurled it, his earlier discomfort at being full seemingly vanishing. He carefully scanned the first few lines of the scroll, fully expecting something silly or possibly something nice but foolish. His eyebrows went up when he realized what he'd been given. Naruto, this, he turned towards the blonde, a slightly odd look of surprise on his face. How'd you get this? The other armored boy's eyes flicked towards the small crowd that was still exchanging money around them before he waved a hand dismissively. Meh, just found that on the side of the road somewhere, thought you'd like it since you food and everything. Choji's eyes did the same before both boys looked over at Teuchi. The man had served ramen in a ninja village long enough to know that gaze. Oi, if you're not going to order something then get out. I don't need people loafing around, I've got paying customers to tend to. The older man shooed many of the non-ninja out, and within a minute, the three shinobi had a little bubble of silence at the now relatively quiet stand. Hinata glanced curiously between the two boys. She knew Naruto had given Choji something the other boy found impressive, but she had no idea what. Naruto, how'd you get a hold of a copy of the Kumo cooking nin recipe list? That got Tucci and Hinata's attention, though Ayame, who'd been listening in as well, didn't know what the big deal was. The blonde smiled a bit. When I visited Kumo with Jiraiya during our trip, I was able to get some serious ins into their archives. I snagged that thing one time on my way out. Choji blinked. How? These aren't as important as they were now that they're solider pills, but they're still usually B-class accessories. Naruto gave him a foxy grin before putting his hands together. There was a puff of smoke and the blonde, armored boy was replaced by an equally blonde girl in a kimono. Her voice was soft, silky, and sultry. This is a ninjutsu version of the Academy's transformation. It doesn't hold up in a fight, but it's almost undetectable, and as long as you don't forget any big details, is indiscernible from a real body. They usually don't frisk a ditzy blonde thoroughly enough. All four listening blinked a couple times at that before Choji was the one to speak. I really don't want to think too hard on that. I completely agree, kid, I completely agree. Hinata stared at the blonde. Naruto-kun. It's Naruko Hinata-chan. Naruko. I don't feel comfortable referring to myself as a guy while I'm like this. Speaking of which, he clapped her hands together, and with another pop and cloud of smoke, she became a he once again. All the while, Ayame was thinking one simple thought. Kinky. Naruto-kun finished waving to the back of a still slightly odd Choji and turned towards her. Nay, Hinata, you heading home? Only if it's with you. The girl blinked and turned towards him, then looked up at the sky to judge the time. She'd known it was after sundown. The challenge had been set to start then, but from the looks of things it was already sometime around 10. Why yes. I have to. She pressed the tips of her index fingers together and looked away. Sorry. Nah, it's alright. I'll just have to take you somewhere nice later then. He grinned at her. He was quite pleased with the color that flooded her cheeks. It gave her a healthy glow instead of making him want to run get a medic nin like the tomato red did. Her mouth worked silently for a moment. Really? Yeah, promise. She stared at him for a long moment. He really meant it. He really was going to take her, the Hyuga failure, the unworthy daughter, the girl that wasn't worth training, that was sent to the academy because her father couldn't be bothered to train a disappointment such as her. He was going to take her out somewhere nice. It finally processed. She smiled. Thank you, Naruto-kun. Gah, how does she do that? Naruto wasn't sure whether he wanted to keep making her smile like that. Those smiles were like getting slapped in the face with a brick with raw cuteness. Those smiles should be S-rank jutsu. Even as he waved bye to the still smiling girl, Naruto had to fight the urge to run back and snatch her up. The way her white eyes sparkled, the light flush of pink to her cheeks, it just made her a lot more attractive and made him want to grab her and use Jiraiya-san's perverted interrogation techniques on her. He wouldn't, of course, he wasn't a pervert like his senseis, and she'd neither expressed a desire to be on the receiving end of those techniques, nor had she earned it. As perverted as they were, to say they made women feel good was like saying the ocean was a bit wet. She would only get those techniques if she earned them and shown that she wasn't against having them performed on her. He wouldn't force something like that on one of his friends, never on one of them. Just how the hell did she get the wind to blow her hair just right when she smiled? Though Hinata's back was turned, though she'd turned down another street from Naruto-kun, though they'd already gone their separate ways, she watched him. He was back, and he'd reminded her exactly why she loved him. Naruto-kun had been kind to everyone he'd met, he'd cared for people, been considerate of their feelings, and had never stopped smiling. When he'd beaten Choji-kun, he'd tried to make it up to the larger boy, despite having won fair and square. He'd happily accepted the rain check on hanging out with Sakura-san and actually seemed proud of the girl for choosing to work at the hospital instead of hanging out with him, something Hinata couldn't really understand. He'd insisted on not taking the free meal the owners of Ichiraku Ramen had tried to give him when they assumed he was going to pay, but when Choji-kun had lost and started to pay, the blonde boy had insisted that his free meals be factored in. He was so kind, so determined, he was perfect. And Sakura-san had been right. He'd noticed her this time. She'd grown out her hair and he'd noticed her. He'd even insisted on taking care of her and paying for her meal. So it was with a small smile that she let her head hang low, her bangs covering the bulging veins around her eyes. She would watch Naruto-kun. She would watch and wait for her chance to prove that she was worthy to walk beside him. To be with him, to be someone he could like. She would change, for him. She would no longer be the failure, the disappointment, the frustration of the Hyuga. She would change, for him. That night, Hyuga Hinata had wonderful dreams. Naruto woke up. For a long moment he didn't move, his breathing didn't change, his eyes didn't flutter, he gave no indication that anything had changed. His room smelled sterile. The smell of cleaning products was almost overwhelming, overlaying the hint of brimstone of the reds and the smell of rain that accompanied the blues. The clock by his bed was slowly ticking, the gears inside clicking and sliding together in a soothing rhythm. Somewhere outside his apartment there was a pair of older women gossiping. He couldn't make out their words from here though. No heartbeat, no breathing, no new smells. He was alone. Naruto opened his eyes. There was no one else in the room. Good. He reached out and grasped the hilt of Maelstrom, pulling the large blade into his lap as he sat up. He yawned and rubbed the sleep from his eyes, his mind shifting into gear. What were his plans for the day? What hadn't he done yesterday? Well, he'd never gotten around to pranking the Anbu for one. But he'd need a couple hours to do that properly. Oh, he could have pranked them in about 30 minutes, it was the after effects that would take a while. Intentionally letting them find him, leading them on a chase around town, then letting himself be captured so as to point out their flaws and weaknesses to their faces. Have a clone switch out with him while another transformed clone created a distraction. Let the clone continue to berate them a bit more. Then appear behind the group of Anbu and make a simple declaration. You could be better. Let me help you. With any luck, they'd let him have unofficial command of the Anbu right then and there. But it was more likely that they would just give him a certain degree of grudging respect and an unofficial advisory role. It would be impractical to be Hokage when the Anbu didn't respect you. He would have to remind them that he was the child that had painted the entire Hokage monument without getting caught and evaded a number of Chunin, Junin and even Anbu for hours on end afterwards. Naruto could content himself with an advisory role for now. He ran his hand through his hair and scratched the back of his head as he let out a yawn. In all likelihood, the Akamichi had read through the scroll he'd given Choji and found his real gift at the end. The recipe to Kumo's unique variation of the solidar pill. He'd had to use chakra to burn up the ramen and beat Choji, otherwise he wouldn't have impressed them nearly as much, nor would he have had an excuse to give him the scroll as a consolation prize. Naruto had been sure to include his notes on the effects it seemed to have and the differences between it and Konoha's version. He'd also been sure to note that he was not a medic nin and that his knowledge of anatomy was useful for little more than field medicine and knowing where best to stab someone. However, he had still brought them the recipe and some basic information on an enemy secret that they had been trying to get for some time now. Unless he missed his mark, he was now more than just friends with the clan heir. He should now have the entire clan's respect and gratitude. This was good. The sooner he had the Akamichi happily on his side, the better. He'd learned something interesting from the Netherworld's books and confirmed with his own experience with his minions. An army marched on its stomach. Naruto didn't particularly need their power. That was primarily useful in large-scale invasions, something Naruto had Gamabunta for. But the Akamichi were the quartermasters of Konoha. The sooner they trusted his judgment and were not just willing, but happy to cater to his decisions and correct him on his mistakes, the better. Finishing his yawn, Naruto swung his legs off his bed, moving Maelstrom to his back as he stood, his chakra reaching out to grip the blade without conscious effort. Naruto stretched, running over his list in his head. The Aburame wouldn't be hard to convince, a simple, logical argument would be enough to win them over. Show them that he was capable, intended to do what was best for his friends and Konoha, and they would follow him. Simple. Easy. Naruto liked it. With another yawn, Naruto headed into the adjoining kitchen in his apartment and scratched his stomach idly. The Nara would be easy as well. Don't give them a reason to oppose him and show that it would be far too troublesome to not help. Simple, and only slightly more difficult. He would have to show that he was the best choice for Hokage and that it was in their best interest to support him actively, or at very least not oppose him. He didn't want a whole family of people who could plan like Shikamaru on his ass. No siree. Naruto swept his hand along the top of his head, slipping of his favorite nightcap and hooking it onto the back of his chair as he passed it. It was silly, he knew, but he loved the little thing. And if anyone except for his friends poked fun at it, they were getting punched in the face. Except Kiba, he'd probably still punch Kiba in the face. Guys should be tough enough to take it without too much trouble and he'd understand. The Inazaka were cool like that. A small smile worked its way onto Naruto's face as he opened his refrigerator. To get the Inazaka on his side, all he really had to do was beat up on their leader a bit, show he was actually pretty nice, and love on him a bit. Done. Undying Inazaka loyalty, blue light special on aisle 2. The Yamanaka? Naruto just hoped they'd go along with the Nara and Akamichi clans. He didn't really know how to specifically ingratiate himself to the clan. Oh, he could be nice and everything, but their style of pseudo-genjutsu and genjutsu just was beyond Naruto's ability to replicate, improve upon, or access similar techniques in other hidden villages. It was a serious pain in Naruto's ass, but he'd just have to wing it with them. He'd have to make time this week to go by each of the clans in person, or have himself invited over by one of his friends. That sounded better and less intrusive. They would be more receptive to his advances in that case. As Naruto sat down at his table, fresh milk and cereal in hand, he scowled. Most of the major clans wouldn't be too large of an issue to convert. He was friends with many of the clan heirs. Nor did he think it would be very hard to integrate himself into the major military subsections of Konoha, such as the Anbu and Junin subcultures. He already had an in to those in the form of Kakashi. Once he had that much support, it should be a simple matter to sway the rest of the council. That was not the issue, no. The reason he scowled as he ate his breakfast had two causes. Namely, the Hyuga and civilian populations. The civilians would be a pain to change. Their perceptions of him as a prankster and the Kyuubi would be exceedingly difficult to change. They were desensitized enough to the shinobi arts to not be awed by walking up a tree or some other feat of physical ability, but they did not have the skill or knowledge to recognize a truly impressive feat of ninjutsu and be respectfully awed by that. No, he'd have to do something major. A simple war on foreign soil wouldn't do. It needed to be immediate and personal to get their attention, but any things that would qualify as that ran the risk of harming his friends as well. And that was not acceptable. Naruto set his spoon aside, picking up his bowl and drinking the leftover milk. No, he'd just have to keep his plans flexible enough to capitalize on any opening to sway their opinions that he could find. Setting his bowl and spoon in the sink, Naruto headed to the shower, leaning maelstrom against the wall before tugging off his clothes, tossing his pajama bottoms and boxers onto the floor. As he turned on the water, setting the temperature just so, Naruto pondered his other problem. The Hyuga. He'd made a promise to Neji that he would change the clan, and he planned to do so. Considering the information that he had gotten on them, Naruto had been tempted to just write off the main branch as collateral damage in the reconstruction of the clan. But Hinata had changed his mind. Not intentionally, mind you, but her very presence had influenced his decision. She was proof that not all the main branch members were assholes, and she would likely be saddened if Naruto removed them, so it seemed Naruto would have to take the Hyuga on a case-by-case basis. Problem. Naruto didn't know how he was going to infiltrate and/or change the clan. They were a noble clan, and Naruto had found that noble clans were snooty twits with sticks shoved up their asses, sideways. Naruto didn't have anything that could automatically ingratiate himself, or even put himself on the same level as the Hyuga, at least in their minds. In the other instances, just being a Konoha nin and Jiraiya-san's apprentice had been enough. Here, they had preconceived notions of who and what he was. It was troubling that he could not think of an efficient and useful way into the Hyuga. Especially with what the main branch had done not only to Neji and his kin, but to Hinata herself. Naruto had recognized the edges of neglect in her eyes, not to the same degree or intensity that he had experienced himself, but the same pain. He would protect her, even from her own family if necessary. With that somber thought, Naruto turned off the water and stepped out of the shower. There was also the issue that he hadn't talked with Tsunade Obaa-chan yet. Though it was likely he'd be talking with her today, it probably wasn't going to be the full debriefing that he'd want. He wanted to get a feel for how she'd changed and how likely it was that she'd just hand him the office. Responsibility changes people, he reflected as he dried himself off. I'm proof of that, having responsibility to the minions, it changed me. How did being Hokage change you, Oba-chan? Naked aside from the towel thrown across his shoulders and the large black blade stuck to his back, Naruto strode back into his room. Thankfully for the majority of the female population of Konoha, his blinds were drawn. He took after his father in a number of ways, and good food and hard exercise had done wonderful things to his figure. With his father's hair, his mother's intense eyes, and the strong lines of his father's face combined with the hint of his mother's gentleness, Naruto would have been more of a heartthrob than his dad if he ever gave himself the chance. Not that he knew that just yet. The boy gave the straps of his cuirass a tug, ensuring the chakra and magic infused into them was kicking in and sealing it tightly against him. There, that's done. He felt the weight of the seals settling on his limbs, and it suddenly was like moving through particularly thick pudding, fighting it for every movement. He liked that feeling. It meant he was going to be just that much stronger at the end of the day. He hadn't dared try and leave those on while fighting Kakashi-sensei. Even by running his chakra through his limbs instead of through his armor, the older man had still noticeably had him beat in the speed category. But if the man hadn't had considerable skill and the Sharingan on him as well, Naruto was pretty sure he could have beaten the man in a taijutsu match. That done, Naruto slowly ran through the seals for the Shadow Clone Jutsu, all of them instead of just the ad hoc cross seal that he normally used. By going through the seals slowly to be sure they were perfect, Naruto improved his chakra control, getting the most out of the technique for the least amount of chakra. But he only made one clone. Naruto then ran through the seals for the summoning jutsu and touched the clone, sending it to the netherworld. He did this every morning. He split his chakra in half with the clone and sent it away. Then the one clone would split itself into 30. The greatest number of shadow clones half his chakra could make that would be stable enough to last a day. 16 of those would each grab a different book on tactics, politics, history, or psychology, and, after lunch, those clones would put down their books and start up a tournament of games. Naruto was pretty sure today was chess day. The reason was simple, they each read a different book to give them a slightly different perspective or mindset, and then played against the other clones, so he wasn't exactly playing against himself. The losers would study the others' games until, eventually, one clone emerged the victor. The tournament winner would then get to play against Naruto in whatever game it was that they'd played, and usually lose. The aged minion was smart, and wily, and experienced to boot. Even if the minion didn't know exactly how to play the game, he learned fast enough that he usually only lost once or twice at a new game. Naruto already knew most of the tactics and tricks the clones, and consequently Naruto, were learning and already knew the more practical applications. Naruto's clones were learning by using the stuff against each other, but Naruto already knew the stuff. At the end of the day in games, the gaming clones would disperse, sending Naruto their collected experience, viewing a large number of games from almost every angle. Naruto learned a lot from that. 10 of the 30 clones would try to improve on his magic, something he had almost no talent for, as Naruto had been disappointed to find. Yes, he had considerable stores of mana even without the fox, and the Kyuubi was almost as great a source of magical power as it was of chakra. But Naruto couldn't use it. Chakra was combining mental and physical energies in the proper amounts for a particular jutsu. Taijutsu was, usually, just drawing on your physical energy and converting it into kinetic hurt. Mana was drawing on and refining your mental and spiritual energy, pushing it through his link to the attuned spellstone in the netherworld, then drawing back the further refined power, and releasing it from his body. It was considerably more complex, at least from his point of view. Naruto found the fireball and flamethrower spells to be surprisingly easy. Throw his mind out to the statue in the netherworld, draw in its power, and push it back out of his body. He had a sneaking suspicion that the demon fox, God, in his tummy was helping with that. Fire and foxes went together surprisingly well. Empowering his armor and sword was similar. He just touched the netherworld with his mind and pushed his power into the minion-empowered metal. Once he started, the magical equipment kept drawing on his power until he cut it off, or, technically, once he ran out of mana, but that was essentially impossible. Supercharging his minions was easy now that he'd practiced it enough. touch the stone in the netherworld with his mind, push his power through it and throw it out at his minions. Like the armor, they'd just keep drawing on it till he stopped it. The spell he'd been working on when Gnarl had called a halt to Naruto learning new spells, and instead switched him to mastering the ones he knew, had been the domination spell. Naruto just couldn't get that one down. It was supposed to slowly break someone's will down till they served you happily and willingly, but Naruto just couldn't wrap his mind around the idea of reaching out to the stone, pushing his power through it, then pulling the power back through himself, then releasing that power from his hand and forcing it into someone else. He was just having so much trouble with it that Gnarl had called a halt to him learning new spells till he got the basics of spellcraft down pat. Another problem. He had trouble drawing on any significant amount of his power at once. He had lots of it, but he couldn't flood a spell with mana like he could jutsu. Not because it was impossible, but because he just didn't know how. Gnarl had said, sadly, that if Naruto had grown up being trained how to draw on mana like he had with Chakra in the academy, he'd be much more fearsome with the spells. As it was though, he'd passed most of the developmental years for magic and would be stuck with rather inflexible spells. It was infuriating. It was also why he had 10 clones working on it during the day. His final 4 clones that would be in the netherworld all day usually split their time between various chakra control exercises, looking into how the netherworld was managed, and studying things that wouldn't be good for tactics, like medicine, sealing, or chemistry. But that was all background stuff for Naruto anymore. His chakra stores would be back to full in an hour tops, so he'd barely notice having his chakra cut in half, and could let his clones do their work on their own without thinking about it. They were essentially him with all his memories and experience and such, but the original usually didn't bother with reading a book or scroll unless it was to keep up appearances. When the original got a chance to train, he usually did physical training, since clones couldn't train reflexes or muscles. He'd have to remember to get some form of training group going with the rest of his friends. He could train himself and them at the same time. A grin spread across his face at the thought as he approached a familiar alley. "You're late." The masked Junin scratched his head idly. "Well, this time I was delayed by filling out all the paperwork for the new team." Naruto stared at his sensei for a long moment before turning to the pink cat beside him. "Why is it that despite the plausibility of his answer, I still think he's full of shit?" "Oh, let it go, Naruto," Sakura admonished lightly. "We can't help it if he laid every chance he can get." Kakashi made a face, mostly under his mask and headband. "I'm losing my dignity, aren't I? It's not that he's lying to us, we're ninja, it's kinda what we do," unnoticed by either of the teens. Something in the air caught said Junin's attention. "My problem is that his lies all suck, and even when he isn't lying you think he is." Sakura actually considered that for a moment. "You've got a point, Naruto." "Nay, Kakashi-sensei." The pink cat turned towards their teacher. "Why do you do that, Kakashi-sensei?" Did you say something, Sakura?" "Kakashi-sensei. Seriously, Kakashi-sensei, how the hell do you get away with being late all the time? I know you're an elite and all, but when I'm Hokage, I ain't going to stand for that shit." "I actually was doing paperwork, Naruto." The lazy Junin looked up from his book at the blonde, noting his disbelieving look. "It takes longer than you'd think to fill it all out." "Then why don't you use some shadow clones to speed the process up? I know not everyone's got my kind of capacity and all, but as long as they don't do any major techniques or forcibly dispelled, you get most of the chakra back." He cocked his head to the side at the Junin. "Making 2 or 3 clones would speed up the process by miles, so why don't you?" Kakashi actually pulled his nose out of his book to give the boy a proud smile, though Naruto could only see his eye. "Well, Naruto, the problem is that since the clones technically aren't me, they can't sign papers for 'em." Trust Naruto to come up with an unusually effective solution right away. It had taken Kakashi months to think of that. Naruto scowled. "That's bull. A shadow clone is effectively you in most respects, but completely in the mental aspect. Paperwork doesn't care if you can't take a hit or are unable to restore your own chakra, so why the hell can't you do it?" Sakura blinked. She hadn't known all of that about shadow clones. Some of it yes, but not all. She'd been surprised that he'd stayed on Kakashi about being late, but he brought up a good points, especially now, and Sakura was interested in the answers as well. Just for curiosity's sake really, but she was interested. Kakashi actually had to think about the answer for a second. "Well, the problem is that protocol just says, clones. as most clones are capable of a certain degree of autonomy but nowhere near enough to justify letting them do paperwork. Also, you and a select few others in the village are capable of using the jutsu for such a, comparatively, frivolous task. The masked Junin tilted his head back, his eye closed in contemplation. Yes, I believe that's it. Protocol says, clones, as in all clones, and there hasn't really been a reason to make an exception for shadow clones. With a snort, Naruto pulled a notepad from somewhere in his armor and began to scribble. He paused for a moment before looking to Kakashi. "Nay, Kakashi-sensei. Do you remember the name and number of that rule?" Both of his teammates stared at him. "What? I've got to remember to change that first thing when I get the job. No way I'm going to just sit and do paperwork all day when I can totally do it faster my way." Kakashi stared at the boy. "Naruto, since when do you plan ahead?" Sakura blinked and turned to her sensei. Didn't he realize that Naruto had planned a lot of their bell test? Or, did he think she'd been the one planning? "Since I grew up." Naruto made it a question, probably, and actually, wondering the same thing as Sakura. "I'm not a kid anymore, Kakashi-sensei." The Junin suddenly became serious. "No, you're not. Naruto? Kakashi-sensei, don't forget to live, Naruto. That's rich coming from you." "Kakashi, I won't, sensei." Sakura was confused, irritated. She wasn't exactly sure, but it was something along those lines. Now, Naruto had been a complete and utter idiot before his trip. He'd pranked people all the time in the academy. He'd painted the Hokage monument, which was actually pretty impressive now that she thought about it. He'd been loud and obnoxious, and a general pain in the ass. But even assuming the Chunin didn't know that Naruto had changed, that kind of look was completely uncalled for. They'd walked to the Hokage's tower in a slightly awkward silence after Kakashi-sensei's comment. Sakura hadn't really understood why the Junin had said that. Of all the people she knew, Naruto was the least likely to forget to live. As they'd walked through the halls, the slightly somber look on the blonde's face had shifted to one of his best grins. She'd briefly considered that it might have been one of his fake ones, but discarded the thought. The smile reached his eyes. It wasn't as big as the grin on his face, but there was a smile in his eyes. The three of them had walked up to the doors of the mission assignment foyer, their spirits lifting, but when the pair of Chunin guards had noticed them, they'd just been, The one on the left had noticed them first and had given them a quick look, doing his job and stuff, making sure they weren't fakes. He hadn't recognized Naruto at first with his armor and sword, but had figured it out when his eyes had landed on Naruto's face. The Chunin had been surprised, but had accepted who it was with just a brief glare at the oversized sword on Naruto's back. That was perfectly understandable. If you're guarding someone, you don't want somebody to bring a giant weapon into the room with them. No, it was the other Chunin that had been an idiot. He'd done the same thing, not recognizing Naruto at first, then figuring it out when he saw the blonde's face, but then he'd glared at Naruto, as if he expected the boy to draw his sword right then and there. Now, Naruto had pranked people and stuff back when he was little, but he'd never been malicious or anything. And that Chunin was giving him a look like he expected Naruto to go crazy and kill people right then and there. Sakura had been very tempted to deck the Chunin. There was no way Naruto didn't notice the look, anymore. He was more than observant enough to notice it, but he didn't say anything, just kept smiling. But a bit of the smile had left his eyes, and Sakura had felt her fists clench. Thankfully, Kakashi-sensei had stepped in, giving the offending Chunin a smile. "Nay, Daikoku-san? Naruto is pretty good, but if you're going to practice for the Junin evaluation, it'd be better to spar against me, nay?" The implication set in and the man paled. "Iick Kakashi-senpai. I understand." Unbeknownst to Sakura, Kakashi had seen the building explosion in the pinkette's eyes and had moved to stave it off. Normally, a ninja should be able to fend for him or herself, but not everyone could take one of Sakura's punches like Naruto. Inner Sakura decided to make herself known as the trio stepped through the doors. "Shanaru. Ain't no one going to hurt my man." Sakura chose to interpret that thought as, no one is going to hurt my teammate. Then Naruto decided to make his presence known as they approached the assignment desk. "Morning, Tsunade Oba-chan. What missions you got for us today?" Sakura decided to amend her earlier thought. "No one's going to hurt my idiot of a teammate but me. Tsunade Shisho would just kill him." The pinkette snagged the blonde around the neck, drawing him into a noogie. "Sorry, sensei. I'll sort him out." Idiot. You've got no idea how terrifying the Goidem is when you say shit like that. Except, the Hokage didn't pound on him, or even yell at him. Instead, her brown eyes went from the kunoichi in front of her desk to the trio in front of her, Team Kakashi. It was a call to attention. Sakura immediately let go of Naruto's head, absently noting that he stood ramrod straight as well once let go. I have your new mission. Just now, a message came in that Suna's case cage was kidnapped by the Akatsuki. The trio stiffened slightly at the news, equally surprised looks on both Naruto and Kakashi-sensei's faces. Your orders are to immediately head to Suna, find out the situation and relay it to Konoha. After that, follow the orders of Suna and back them up. They each gave a quick nod, Naruto's face quickly becoming a scowl. How much information do we have? Only that the Akatsuki member used explosives of some kind. The angry scowl deepened. Then would it be possible to requisition a tracker-type nin or team for this mission? Preferably a Hyuga. One of the mission assigners at the table scowled right back. Why? Naruto's head snapped to the man. If Gaara has been kidnapped, it is quite likely that the enemy is taking him far away from Sanagakure to avoid interference with their plan. I would like a tracker of our own in addition to whatever Suna can provide. An Aburame wouldn't be very useful considering that they haven't tagged the Gaara, and I don't know how useful an Inazaka's nose would be in the desert, but I know Gaara well enough that I can tell a Hyuga what to look for. The blonde turned back to the Hokage. As such, I would like to requisition a team of tracker types. Tsunade Shisho nodded, reasonable. However, all of the tracker-type teams are currently indisposed and unavailable. Naruto scowled. Team Kurenai? Just left on a week-long mission this morning. Damn, the frown on Naruto's face was considerable. Understood. Tsunade looked hard at Naruto. Anything else? The boy shook his head. Alright then. Team Kakashi nodded as one. Dismissed. Kakashi shunshined off with a small burst of smoke. Naruto clapped his hands together and four more of him blurred into existence. The original made a ram, then snake seal and disappeared in a burst of smoke, his clones leaping out the windows behind the desks. Sakura actually felt kind of silly walking out the doors at a quick pace. Alright, we're off. Naruto tugged on the straps of the large scroll on his back beside Maelstrom. Sakura assumed that it was some form of storage scroll. He had been traveling with a seal master for the past 2 years. Aside from that, he only had a canteen strapped to his left hip to offset the standard shinobi carrying pouch on his right. Considering that Naruto had consistently shown surprising forethought in the past 2 days, Sakura had a feeling the canteen and pouch weren't normal either. You didn't go to the desert with just a single canteen. Kakashi-sensei and herself actually had sizable backpacks, packed mostly with filled canteens. Sakura sent her sensei a quick salute. Okay Tsunade Shisho, off we go. The Pinkette watched a quick, silent communication pass between Iruka-sensei and the Goidem before the scarred man gave them his own farewell. Do your best. Of course. The blonde sent a quick grin back before taking a step forward. But only one step forward as he stopped and his head jerked up. Yo, holy shit, where the hell'd he come from? I'll kick his ass for startling me. Shanaru, going on a mission, Naruto? Hey, the blonde smirked. More importantly, the toad sage turned towards Tsunade-sensei. Tsunade, something terrible's happened. Suna's case cage. I know, the Hokage interrupted him as she scratched herself and pointed at Team Kakashi. I'm about to send these guys off there now. Jiraiya's face hardened. Tsunade. I know. Jiraiya scowled and turned towards his apprentice. Naruto? I know, be careful about the Akatsuki. I'll get the hell out of there if things get too rough, but they've got one of my friends Jiraiya-san. Sakura had never seen her friend so serious before. On his more mature, yet still boyish face, it was strange, yet it looked good. I can't just let them take him. After a moment, the toad sage nodded before turning away from the blonde. Kakashi. Make sure he doesn't do anything stupid. He's all yours. Kakashi-sensei gave Jiraiya what Sakura interpreted as his, I got your meaning, I'll be serious smile. Yeah. Naruto was already on the move. Kakashi-sensei, Sakura-chan, let's go. A slight grimace settled onto Sakura's face before she fell into step behind him. Right. Kakashi gave the 2 Sannin, and 1 academy instructor, what amounted to an apologetic smile and wave. See ya. Within seconds of his footsteps following his students, they took off, almost literally, moving at a considerable clip down the road. Iruka stared somberly at the retreating forms of two of his students, broken out of his thoughts by the Hokage's voice. Worried? He considered the question for a moment. No, he's not the kind of weak shinobi I would worry about. Sakura too. What? You mean, Gaara? The blonde kunoichi scowled at the dirt. I knew I had a bad feeling. Kakashi spoke in his mission voice. It'll take 3 days to get to Suna from here. Let's hurry. Agreed. The four figures blurred into movement. Naruto clenched his fists tightly, feeling the bones and sinew creak under his own strength. His friend, one of his few, precious friends, was in danger. The one Jinchuriki he hadn't tagged. The one host he hadn't thought to seek out. The one hidden village he hadn't visited. Of course they were going after Gaara first. They'd known the Akatsuki were going to go in order for almost 6 months now. Why hadn't he just swung by to say hi? Why, Naruto, just because I said to hurry, doesn't mean you should split up the team. He glanced back to find his teammates lagging behind and had to push down a frustrated growl. We're not going fast enough. Naruto, we can't go any faster and not risk hurting ourselves. I know, but I can. His hands came up into a familiar cross-shaped seal and he shunted his chakra outwards. 2 more Narutos appeared in the trees, leaping beside the original. All 3 stopped on a branch, taking a knee. Get on. I might be able to make it in 2 carrying you guys and I know it won't hurt me. Sakura stopped beside one of the blondes, Naruto. While Temari's eyes were worried and slightly hopeful, Kakashi's were as hard as steel. Naruto, are you certain? Positive. After a moment's calculation, Kakashi nodded. Move your sword and scroll to the front then. Naruto did better than that. The blonde slid his scroll to the front and turned maelstrom so it rested horizontally on his lower back, edge down. There, a seat to boot. Now let's go. Sakura didn't hesitate more than a second before clambering onto the blonde's back, gripping his shoulders as he hooked his arms under her knees. Temari followed suit a moment later when the clone before her discarded its sword and scroll, which dispersed into smoke. At her slightly curious gaze, her Naruto simply said, to make up for the weight of your fan and pack. Kakashi declined, waving off the clone before him. I can keep up with you for now. Don't waste the chakra on me. The clone nodded before dispersing itself, letting its chakra return to the original. Everyone settled then? Naruto tried. He really tried to keep his voice controlled, but the edges of his impatience and anger were leaking in. Thankfully for all involved, they were ready. Good. Both Narutos leapt off their branches with enough force to crack the wood beneath them, Kakashi catching up only moments later. Despite his armor, despite his sword, despite his scroll, despite the young woman on his back, despite her pack, Naruto set a hard pace. A speed even Kakashi, more accustomed to moving in extremely fast but short bursts, knew he'd have trouble keeping up with for any length of time. After one branch quite literally buckled beneath Naruto's feet, Sakura spoke up. Naruto, what's wrong? She wasn't worried about her safety or chastity. When the hands on her knees tightened, she was worried about Naruto. The boy was silent for almost a minute before he spoke. I'm just so angry, not just at the Akatsuki, but myself. Everyone looked over at Naruto as he spoke, his voice quiet. I've been to Iwa, Kumo, Kiri, and a number of other, smaller hidden villages. But I never thought to stop by Suna, not once. All the times I could have swung by to just say hi to one of my friends, to someone who understood me. I never did. He growled for a moment before stifling it, but it was enough to startle the women and briefly terrify Kakashi. I could have prevented this, should have known they'd go after him, the pieces were all there. But I didn't see it. Now, one of my best friends, the one I understand the best, he's been captured by the Akatsuki. After a second, Temari carefully asked, understand the best? Naruto didn't speak for a long moment, considering exactly what he wanted to tell them right now. The boy wasn't sure Sakura wouldn't hate him, or at least shun him, for his secret, so, for now, he would withhold information on the Kyuubi. Gaara and I, we're a lot alike. Our villages hated us just for existing. They tried to kill us in their own ways. Konoha tried to sabotage me at every step of my ninja training. Suna wasn't as subtle. Sakura winced, remembering the gazes she'd occasionally seen directed at the blonde. He was targeted by the Akatsuki, just like me. His three companions stiffened slightly at the undirected killing intent that swept out of the blonde for just a moment, and yet. Why is it always him that gets the worst of it? Why is it him, and him alone? That's why. That's why I won't just sit around and wait for the report. That's why I'm going to be there for him. This time, I'll save him, and I'll make sure he stays saved. The branch he just landed on exploded beneath him as he leapt. This time, I'll save my friend. Naruto could feel the angry tears forming at the corners of his eyes, knowing that his clone was doing so as well. He didn't notice the tears of gratitude in the other blonde's eyes, Uzumaki Naruto. Thank you. The pink head on Naruto's back absorbed what her friend had said for several minutes before speaking. Naruto. He turned his head slightly, but didn't take his eyes off the branches in front of him. You've really been through a lot, haven't you? The tense silence was all the answer she needed. Uchiha Itachi, you're his target, aren't you? If it had been possible to stumble midair, Naruto would have done it. I wasn't just training these past 2.5 years. Sakura gripped her teammate's shoulders tightly. I was looking through Tsunade's notes and did as much research on the goings-abouts as I could. The enemy Sasuke-kun wants to kill. It's really his older brother Itachi, a member of the Akatsuki, isn't it? Naruto? He didn't know how. Maybe it was the fact that she could use a tree as a club. Maybe it was that she still had the same temper as always, but he'd forgotten just how sharp his pink-haired friend could be. Because of that desire, that motivation, Sasuke is now with Orochimaru in order to gain power. She paused before continuing on, her voice as hard as the magically enhanced blade she sat on. But Orochimaru only wants Sasuke's body, doesn't he? All we have left is half a year. And Orochimaru was originally a member of the Akatsuki. Her voice trailed off for a moment before she picked up strength again. In other words, what I'm saying is this. As we get closer to the Akatsuki, we get closer to information about Orochimaru. And therefore, we get closer to Sasuke-kun. Naruto grinned and focused his attention back ahead. Two birds with one stone. I like that. For once, both sides of Sakura's mind agreed wholeheartedly and without the slightest hesitation. This time, I will save those two. But, Sakura-chan, the pinkette's attention snapped back to the boy she was riding. I know I promised to bring Sasuke Teme back, but, Naruto? The grip on Sakura's knees tightened for a moment before Naruto forced himself to relax. Hear me out. Sasuke was my friend, and I'd like him to stay my friend, but he quite literally said he was cutting all his ties of friendship with me and Konoha. We fought, and we're probably going to fight again when we meet again. But beating up on me, and hurting you. Those are two very different things. Naruto turned his head to look Sakura in the eye. Cerulean blue boring into green. If he attacks you, or anyone else I consider a friend, he will have lost his chance. Naruto, what exactly do you mean? I mean, if he attacks someone precious to me, I'm not going to go out of my way to bring him back alive. He stared into her eyes for a long moment before turning back to the direction he was running. I'm sorry. But your life is more precious to me than his. Sakura gripped his shoulders so tightly, they all heard his bones creak in protest. In another world, in another time and place, Sakura might have gotten angry at Naruto. She might have been astonished that Naruto would even consider something like that. That Sakura might have shunned the blonde that she thought she knew. This was not then or there, and this was not that Sakura. This Sakura knew a Naruto that thought ahead. A Naruto that considered the consequences of his actions, a Naruto that had gone out of his way to help his friends. This Naruto didn't say stupid things that hurt people's feelings while meaning well. This Naruto didn't miss stuff that was stupidly blatant. This Naruto knew what was going on in the world. A Naruto that Sakura was finding herself liking despite her best efforts. The pink-haired girl couldn't get angry or be shocked that this more pragmatic Naruto cared for her safety more than the crush she'd had as a kid. When she spoke, her voice was strong, if soft, then. I guess I'll just have to be sure to save him before that, huh? Naruto smiled at her. That's my girl. For a moment, Sakura beamed right back at him. Then the meaning of his words sunk in. Oi, watch how intimately you refer to me, idiot. The pinkette lightly thumped Naruto on the back of his head, just above the knot of his headband. The blonde chuckled just a bit before admonishing his passenger. Nay nay, is that any way to treat your ride? Sakura scowled playfully at the blonde, just as grateful as him for a way to diffuse the tense atmosphere. Well, you should be careful how you refer to a lady, idiot. The pinkette gave him a one-handed noogie. gripping his shoulder tightly with her other hand to keep from falling off the still fast-moving blonde. "Oi, do you want to get dumped on your ass?" It was then, as Kakashi watched his two former students bicker back and forth, that the masked Junin finally realized something important. He might have known it on an intellectual level for quite some time, but he'd never really known it in his heart. Naruto was Naruto, and Sakura was Sakura. Naruto wasn't Obito, or Jiraiya, or even Minato-sensei. He was just Naruto. And Sakura, she wasn't Rin or Tsunade or anyone else. She was Sakura. He'd always put people into these little boxes. It didn't always work and it wasn't really right, but it was what he'd done. In his mind and heart, he had been teaching his team all over again. Naruto had been Obito, the knucklehead, the idiot, the loud one, the dead last. Sakura had been Rin, the kunoichi, the one with the hair-trigger temper, the forgettable one. The fangirl. Sasuke had somehow been a cross between Obito and himself. A loner with a troubled past, living in the past, an heir to the Sharingan. The genius. But now Kakashi knew, truly knew, deep down, that they weren't. They didn't fit in those nice little boxes. Sasuke had been focused on revenge and anger, caught up with all his own troubles without any real support. Kakashi had tried to provide some, but it hadn't been enough to keep Orochimaru's offer from looking too promising. Sakura had taken it upon herself to become stronger. It had been almost entirely under her own power that she'd gotten her skill and power. The Goidem had guided her through her growth, but it had taken Sakura's drive to get there. She wasn't going to sit there and be rescued, not anymore. She would not be forgotten. And Naruto, Uzumaki Naruto, the #1 most unpredictable ninja Kakashi had ever met. He wasn't an idiot, he was becoming his own kind of unconventional genius. From what he'd heard from Jiraiya and seen himself, Kakashi knew that Naruto had considerable talent for subtle manipulation. He'd seen the boy's potential in close combat, been on the other side of his growing tactical ability. Naruto was going to be the next Hokage. Kakashi would have to remember not to be late to his coronation. The boy had sounded serious about not standing for that shit. Memo to self. Retire ASAP after Naruto becomes Hokage. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.